Hey friends, around 70% of viewers who watch my videos haven't subscribed yet. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing. It would truly mean a lot to me. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps the videos reach more people and really helps the channel grow. Thank you so much. Let me know in the comments which city or country are you watching from. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. Work had been relentless, and I needed a break. A real break, away from the city's noise and constant rush. So, I decided to rent an Airbnb in a small town about 3 hours from where I lived. It was a place I'd never been to before, but the pictures on the listing showed a modest house, surrounded by trees and quiet streets. Nothing fancy, but that's exactly what I wanted. Simplicity and peace. The day I left, I packed my bags with care, making sure I had everything I would need for the weekend. Clothes, toiletries, some books, snacks, and my laptop, just in case I wanted to do some writing or work remotely. I didn't expect to need it, but I always like to be prepared. The drive was smooth, with the sun shining gently through the clouds. I didn't rush. I wanted to enjoy the road, the small towns, and the open fields I passed along the way. When I arrived, the neighborhood was quiet, almost too quiet after the constant noise of the city. The house was just as the pictures showed, small, with a wooden porch and a few flower pots on the steps. The paint was a little chipped in places, but that gave it a kind of charm. Felt homey. I took a deep breath and unlocked the door. Inside, the house was clean but clearly lived in. The wooden floors creaked a bit under my feet, and there was a faint smell of wood polish mixed with a hint of something like cinnamon. The living room had a comfortable old couch, a small coffee table with a stack of magazines and books, and a TV mounted on the wall. The kitchen was simple, with white cabinets and a small window that looked out into the backyard. It wasn't modern or flashy, but it felt real. I liked that. I spent some time unpacking and making the space my own for a few days. I opened the windows to let the fresh air in. Outside, the trees swayed gently in the wind, and I could hear birds chirping somewhere in the distance. No cars, no sirens, no honking, just nature and silence. It was exactly what I needed. That evening, I cooked myself a simple meal. I found some pasta and sauce in the cupboards. Left by the previous guest or the owner, I wasn't sure. The stove worked well enough, and I sat down by the small dining table to eat. The quiet made me notice little things I never paid attention to before. The ticking of the old clock on the wall, the way the shadows moved as the sun went down. After dinner, I settled on the couch with a book I had brought along. The soft glow of the lamp made the room feel warm and cozy. Outside, the sky darkened, and the stars slowly appeared, shining brighter than I had seen them in the city. It was peaceful in a way that felt almost foreign to me. That first night, I slept deeply. The mattress wasn't perfect, but it was comfortable enough. The silence was a little overwhelming at first, but eventually, it became soothing. I woke up early the next morning to the sound of birds and the soft light filtering through the curtains. The next few days followed a slow, easy rhythm. I explored the town a little, visited a small bakery where the smell of fresh bread filled the air, walked through quiet streets lined with trees, and sat by the riverbank watching the water flow. I spent long hours reading and writing, enjoying meals I made in the little kitchen, and just sitting on the porch, watching the world go by. The Airbnb became more than just a place to stay. It was a quiet refuge where I could slow down and breathe. The small things mattered. The way the morning light hit the floor, the feel of the cool breeze on my skin, the sound of leaves rustling. The house didn't have any fancy amenities, but it had a warmth and simplicity that made me feel grounded. One afternoon, as I was sitting on the porch reading, I noticed a small garden in the backyard. It looked like it hadn't been tended in a while, but there were still some flowers growing stubbornly among the weeds. I decided to spend some time clearing the weeds, pulling them out carefully and moving rocks around. It felt good to work with my hands, to make something a little nicer, even if just for myself. The owner had left a few notes in a guest book. I read through them and found stories from people who had stayed here before. They talked about the quiet, the peaceful nights, the slow mornings. It made me feel connected to others who had found some calm here too. By the third night, I was completely settled. I cooked a bit more, tried a new recipe I found online, and even made some tea from the leaves I had picked up at the local store. I sat outside again, looking up at the stars, feeling the cool air on my face. The town was so quiet. The only sound was the occasional rustle of a tree or the distant bark of a dog. On my last day, I woke up early and packed my bags slowly. I didn't want to leave this place, but I knew I had to go back to my life. I took one last walk around the neighborhood, noticing things I hadn't before. The way the sun hit the roofs, the small details in the gardens, the peaceful streets. It was hard to leave. Before I locked the door, I took a moment to stand on the porch and breathe it all in. The quiet, the calm, the feeling of being somewhere simple and real. I realized how much I had needed this time. Not just to escape the city, but to find a little piece of myself again. Driving back, the world seemed louder and faster, but I felt ready. The Airbnb hadn't been perfect, but it had been exactly what I needed. A place to slow down, to breathe, and to remember that sometimes, the simplest things bring the greatest peace. I had booked a small Airbnb for a weekend getaway, something quiet and away from the city noise. I was feeling tired from work and needed a change of scene. Just somewhere simple, peaceful, and with nature nearby. I picked a cabin in a rural area a few hours from my home, a place that looked cozy in the pictures, surrounded by trees and fields. The host's reviews were good, and the price was right. It was nothing fancy, but exactly what I was looking for. The drive there was longer than I expected. It was late afternoon when I finally arrived, the sun hanging low in the sky and casting a golden light over the countryside. The road had narrowed to a single-lane dirt path, and I had to slow down for the occasional pothole and overhanging branches. My car was coated in dust by the time I pulled up near the cabin. The house was small but solid-looking. It was built of weathered wood, with a front porch running the length of the building. There were a few rocking chairs on the porch, worn but sturdy, and a small table with a potted plant on it. The roof had dark shingles, and smoke was faintly rising from the chimney, though I wasn't expecting anyone else there. I took my bags inside. The interior was exactly like the pictures, but even more comforting in real life. The wooden floors creaked slightly underfoot, and the smell of pine and old wood filled the air. There was a small living room with a couch, a coffee table, and a modest bookshelf filled with well-read books. The kitchen was tiny but neat, with basic appliances, a stove, a microwave, and a small fridge. There was one bedroom with a queen-sized bed, the linens fresh and clean. The bathroom was simple but tidy, with fresh towels folded on a rack. I set my bags down, took a deep breath, and let myself relax. The quiet was immediate and thick. The only sounds were the occasional birds and the gentle rustling of leaves outside the window. I decided to unpack slowly, hanging my clothes in the small closet and arranging my toiletries on the bathroom shelf. After that, I made myself a cup of tea using the electric kettle in the kitchen. I sat on the porch with the tea, watching the sun set behind the trees. The colors shifted from orange to pink to a deep blue as night fell. The stars began to appear, twinkling sharply in the clear sky. The air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine needles. I felt a calm I hadn't known in months. Inside, I lit a few candles I had brought, filling the room with a soft, warm glow. I pulled a blanket over myself on the couch and picked up a book from the shelf. The quiet was so complete that I could hear the ticking of the old clock on the wall. Around midnight, I went to bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable, and the blankets were thick enough for the cool night. I slept deeply, the silence outside broken only by distant sounds of nature. A night bird calling, the occasional rustle of a small animal in the brush. The next morning, I woke early to the light filtering through the curtains. I opened the window to let fresh air in. Outside, the morning was crisp and clear. I made coffee in the small kitchen, enjoying the slow start. After breakfast, I put on my hiking boots and set out to explore the area. The cabin was near a forest path that led into the woods. The trail was narrow but well-trodden, winding through tall trees whose leaves were just beginning to change color for the season. The air was fresh and smelled of moss and pine. I walked slowly, listening to the crunch of leaves underfoot and the distant chirping of birds. Along the path, I noticed small signs of wildlife. A deer's tracks in the mud, the broken branch of a bush where a rabbit had been hiding, and scattered acorns on the ground. I took a few pictures with my phone, wanting to remember the peace of this place. After a couple of hours, I returned to the cabin. I was tired but refreshed. I decided to try out the small grill outside. The host had left charcoal and some utensils, so I cooked a simple lunch, some sausages and vegetables. The smoke rose in thin wisps, and the smell mixed with the fresh air made me feel content. In the afternoon, I settled back onto the porch with a notebook. I wrote about my time here, the feeling of calm that came with being so removed from the city. I made lists of things I wanted to do when I returned to my regular life, plans for work and rest and adventure. That evening, I prepared a small dinner inside and lit the fireplace. The crackling of the fire was comforting. I sat near it, sipping a glass of wine I had brought, feeling warmth spreading through my body. The night was colder now, and the thick blanket I wrapped around myself helped me stay cozy. Sleep came early that night. I woke a few times but quickly fell back into deep rest. The next day was more relaxed. I spent the morning reading and napping. I went back to the forest path later in the afternoon for a shorter walk, stopping by a small creek I hadn't noticed before. The water was clear and cold, running over smooth stones. I took off my shoes and dipped my feet in, feeling the chill spread. As the sun began to set, I packed my bags slowly, not wanting to leave but knowing I had to return to reality. I cleaned the cabin a little, wiped down surfaces, took out the trash, and made sure everything was in order like the host requested. Before locking the door, I stood on the porch again, looking out at the wide open space and the forest beyond. The sky was painted in deep purples and reds, the stars beginning to show once more. I breathed deeply, feeling grateful for this quiet weekend. The drive back to the city was easier, even though it was dark and the road was rough. I played soft music in the car and let my thoughts drift. I felt calmer, more grounded. The stress that had weighed on me before this trip seemed lighter. When I got home, I unpacked slowly and organized my things, carrying with me the sense of peace I had found at that small cabin. The experience reminded me how important it is to take time away from the rush of everyday life, to slow down and connect with simple things. The sound of the wind in the trees, the smell of fresh air, the warmth of a fire. I knew I would come back again someday. The cabin was more than just a place to stay. It was a refuge, a reminder of quiet moments that help carry you through the busy world. I had been feeling the need to get away from the usual busy life for a while. My job was stressful, and I hadn't taken a break in months. I wanted something quiet, away from the noise of the city, with nothing but nature around me. I decided to look for an Airbnb place that was isolated but still comfortable enough to stay for a few days. After scrolling through many options, I found a cabin listed in a small rural area about 3 hours from the city. The pictures showed a simple wooden cabin surrounded by trees, with a small porch and a view of a small lake nearby. It looked peaceful and untouched, exactly what I wanted. I booked the cabin for 4 nights. The host's reviews were good, nothing fancy, but clean and straightforward. No mention of anything unusual or complicated. I packed my bags with some clothes, food, a few books, and my laptop, thinking I might spend some time working remotely or just reading by the fire. I planned to drive there early in the morning to make the most of my time. The drive was longer than I expected. The roads became narrower and bumpier as I got further from the city. The GPS stopped working properly after a certain point, and I had to rely on the signs and my own sense of direction. Eventually, I found the dirt road leading to the cabin. The trees thickened around me, and the air smelled fresher, cooler. The silence was noticeable. No cars, no people, just the sounds of birds and wind in the leaves. When I arrived, The cabin was exactly as pictured. The wood was a bit weathered but well maintained. The porch had 2 rocking chairs facing the small lake behind the cabin. I parked my car near the side and took a deep breath. The place felt calm, almost like it had been waiting for someone to come and relax. I opened the door and stepped inside. The inside was small but cozy. There was a simple kitchen with a small fridge, a gas stove, and a few cabinets with plates and utensils. The living area had a couch, a small wooden table, and a wood stove for heating. The bedroom was just a single room with a queen bed and a window overlooking the trees. The bathroom was small with a shower and basic facilities. Everything was clean and ready for use. I spent the first afternoon unpacking and exploring the area. The lake was only a short walk from the cabin. The water was clear and still, reflecting the trees and sky above. I took off my shoes and dipped my feet in the cool water. It was refreshing. I sat by the shore for a long time, just watching the ripples and listening to the quiet around me. There was no signal for my phone, which was a relief. I felt cut off from the world in a good way. That evening, I made a small fire in the wood stove. The cabin smelled of pine and smoke. I cooked a simple meal, some pasta I had brought and canned sauce. I ate while sitting on the couch, looking out the window at the dark forest. The only light came from the fire and the stars outside. I didn't feel lonely or scared. It was peaceful. The next few days passed quietly. I spent mornings walking around the property, taking photos of plants and animals. I saw deer tracks near the edge of the woods and heard the calls of birds I didn't recognize. Sometimes I sat on the porch, writing in my journal or reading. The nights were cold, but the wood stove kept the cabin warm. One morning, while I was walking a little further into the woods, I noticed an old, broken-down fence. It looked like it had been part of some old farm or property boundary. The wood was rotting, and the metal wire was rusted. Beyond the fence was an open field, overgrown with tall grass and wildflowers. I walked there for a while, feeling like I had stepped back in time. On my third night, a strong wind blew through the trees. The branches scratched the windows, and the roof creaked. The power was out in the area, but the cabin didn't rely on electricity except for a few lights powered by a generator the host said was kept for emergencies. I lit candles I had brought and sat by the fire. The wind howled outside, but inside, the cabin felt safe. The next day, the sun came out again. I went back to the lake, where the water was calm and inviting. I found a small wooden dock and sat on the edge, letting my feet dangle over the water. A family of ducks swam nearby, and I watched their smooth movements. I took photos, hoping to capture the simple beauty of the place. On the last night, I prepared to leave the next morning. I cleaned up the cabin, put the fire out carefully, and packed my bags. Before going to bed, I sat on the porch one last time. The stars were bright, and the air was cool and fresh. I thought about how different this place was from my daily life, how much I needed this quiet time. When I woke up, I had breakfast, then loaded my bags into the car. I took one last look around the cabin, feeling a quiet gratitude for the experience. The time there was simple and slow, but exactly what I needed. I started the car and drove away, already thinking about when I could come back again. The drive back was peaceful. I felt calmer, more relaxed than I had in months. This trip wasn't about excitement or adventure. It was about finding stillness, being alone with my thoughts, and remembering that sometimes the simplest places can be the most meaningful. I had never been the kind of person to take spontaneous trips or book places without a plan. I liked routines, familiar faces, and places where everything made sense. But that year, something inside me changed. Maybe it was the constant hum of city life pressing down on me, or the feeling of being stuck in the same cycle every day. I needed space, some quiet, something different. I found myself scrolling through Airbnb listings late one night, looking for a place that was neither a hotel nor a crowded hostel, but a simple spot where I could get away and breathe. That's how I ended up booking a small cabin just outside a town I had never heard of. The listing was modest, a one-bedroom cabin in the woods, with a small porch and a wood stove for heat. The pictures showed a tidy little place, a simple wooden structure surrounded by tall pine trees, with sunlight filtering through the branches. Promised peace and quiet. No Wi-Fi, the host said, but there was a well-stocked bookshelf and some board games. I wanted to disconnect, so I didn't mind. I packed lightly, just a small bag with essentials. Clothes, a notebook, some snacks, and a camera. The drive was longer than I expected. Winding roads through dense forests, past small farms and lakes reflecting the gray sky. When I finally arrived, the air smelled of pine and wet earth, fresh and clean in a way that felt unfamiliar to me after years in the city. The cabin was exactly as the pictures had shown. It sat on a slight rise, with a porch that looked out into the woods. The trees stood close, tall and still, like silent watchers. I unlocked the door with the code the host had sent, stepped inside, and the wooden floor creaked softly under my feet. Inside, the cabin was warm, despite the cold outside. The wood stove was already lit, its small flames dancing behind the glass door. I set down my bag and looked around. The walls were lined with wooden panels, the furniture simple but sturdy. A small table with 2 chairs, a comfy armchair with a knitted blanket draped over it, and a bed covered in a thick quilt. A window above the sink looked out onto the woods, and the sunlight spilled in, casting soft shadows. I unpacked slowly, folding my clothes and placing them neatly in the small closet. Then I sat down in the armchair with the blanket wrapped around me, looking out the window. The forest seemed endless, the trees stretching far beyond what I could see. I spent the first day settling in. I chopped some wood for the stove, learning to stack it carefully to keep the fire burning steadily. I read a book from the shelf, a novel I had never heard of but found surprisingly engaging. I wrote in my notebook, trying to capture the feeling of being somewhere quiet, away from the noise. The nights were dark, deeper than I had imagined. Without streetlights or nearby houses, the sky opened up above me, filled with stars so bright it almost hurt to look at them. I stepped outside on the porch, the air crisp and cold, and for a moment, I felt small in the vastness of it all. Sleep came easily, wrapped in the quiet and the warmth of the cabin. But it was the mornings that became my favorite part of the stay. I woke early, before the sun, to watch the first light seep into the woods. The birds started their songs, soft chirps and calls, and the air was filled with the smell of pine needles and damp earth. Each morning, I brewed coffee on the little stovetop pot, the scent filling the small cabin. I ate simple breakfasts, toast with jam, sometimes eggs, and then went outside to explore. There were trails through the forest, though the host had warned me they weren't well marked. I found a path near the cabin and followed it carefully, stepping over roots and stones. The forest floor was thick with moss and fallen leaves, soft underfoot. I saw deer tracks in the mud and occasionally caught sight of small animals darting through the underbrush. On one walk, I found a small clearing with a shallow creek running through it. The water was clear and cold, tumbling over smooth stones. I sat on a rock for a while, dipping my fingers into the water, watching the ripples spread. The quiet was so complete that I could hear my own breath and the soft rustle of leaves. As the days passed, I fell into a rhythm. Wake, coffee, walk, read, write, eat, sit by the fire, sleep. The simplicity was something I hadn't realized I was missing. I didn't check my phone much, only once a day or so to let family know I was okay. No emails, no news, just the cabin and the forest. One afternoon, I noticed the sky darkening, heavy with clouds rolling in from the west. The wind picked up, shaking the trees and sending leaves tumbling across the ground. I hurried back to the cabin, feeling the first drops of rain before I reached the porch. Inside, I closed the windows and stoked the fire, watching the flames flicker as the rain pattered on the roof. The storm lasted through the night, loud and steady. Thunder rolled in the distance, and the wind howled around the cabin. I lay in bed listening to the sounds, feeling strangely comforted by the strength of the weather outside. It reminded me that I was not alone. The world was alive and moving beyond my small refuge. The next morning, the storm had passed. The air was fresh and clean, washed by the rain. The forest looked different, leaves glistening with droplets, the ground damp and soft. I went outside and took a deep breath, feeling renewed. I decided to explore further that day, taking a longer trail the host had mentioned in a note tucked into the welcome booklet. It led to a small lake about 2 miles from the cabin. The path was harder, steeper in places, but the woods were beautiful. I stopped often to rest and take pictures. A fallen log covered in moss, a cluster of wildflowers bright against the green, a bird perched high in a tree. When I reached the lake, it was quiet and still. The water reflected the sky like glass, surrounded by tall pines and the occasional birch. There was a small wooden dock, weathered and worn, stretching out into the water. I sat on the edge, dangling my feet above the surface, watching small fish swim near the shore. The sun was warm on my skin, and the silence felt complete, except for the occasional splash of a fish or the call of a distant bird. I stayed there for a long time, just sitting and breathing, feeling a calm I hadn't known in years. On the way back to the cabin, the light was softer, the sun lower in the sky. Shadows stretched long across the trail, and the forest took on a golden glow. I thought about how small this place felt in comparison to the city I had left behind, how much I had been missing. That night, as I sat by the fire, I thought about the whole trip. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a chance to slow down, to be quiet, to listen to myself again. The simple act of being in one place, disconnected from the rush of everyday life, had changed something inside me. The last few days passed much like the first. Walks, reading, writing, quiet moments on the porch. I even tried cooking a simple stew on the stove, chopping vegetables carefully and letting the aroma fill the cabin. It was a small thing, but it made the place feel more like home. On my final night, I sat outside for a long time, wrapped in my blanket against the chill. The stars were out again, brighter than I'd ever seen. I thought about the people who had lived in these woods before me, the stories the trees could tell if they spoke. I realized I was leaving not just a place, but a piece of myself behind, the part that could be still, that could find peace in quiet and nature. The morning I left, I packed slowly, careful not to rush. I stacked the remaining firewood, wiped down the counters, and made sure the cabin was just as I had found it. The host's instructions had emphasized respect for the space, and I felt a responsibility to leave it well. As I drove away, the road stretched before me, lined by trees that seemed to nod in farewell. The quiet of the woods lingered in my mind, a contrast to the noise I knew awaited me back in the city. But something had shifted. I knew I would carry this calm with me, a reminder that sometimes the simplest places hold the deepest peace. The trip was over, but the feeling stayed, the feeling of space, of quiet, and of being exactly where I needed to be. I had booked the Airbnb on a whim. It wasn't a place I planned for months or even weeks in advance. I was just tired of city life and wanted to get away for a few days, somewhere quiet but not completely isolated. I found a small cabin listed on Airbnb, nestled on the edge of a forest in a rural town about 3 hours away from my city apartment. The pictures looked promising, simple, rustic but clean, with large windows and a porch overlooking a small lake. The reviews were positive enough, though not many people had stayed there recently. The day I arrived, the sky was overcast, a gentle gray stretching as far as I could see on the highway. I packed my things the night before with a sense of relief, eager to leave behind the noise and rush of everyday life. The drive was smooth, the roads getting smaller and less busy the closer I got to the town. I noticed fields of brown grass and patches of bare trees still holding on to the last traces of fall. When I finally took the dirt road that led to the cabin, the world seemed to quiet down. The cabin was exactly as described. It was modest, wooden walls, a metal roof that gleamed slightly in the weak sunlight, and a porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building. The lake was right there, not more than 50 feet from the porch, calm and reflective. I pulled my suitcase out of the car and stepped up onto the porch. The air smelled fresh, tinged with pine and damp earth. Inside, the cabin was small but well kept. A single room made up the living space with a kitchen along one wall. The furnishings were simple. A small wooden table with 2 chairs, a couch covered in a thick, worn fabric, and a bed pushed into a corner. The kitchen had a stove, a small fridge, and some basic utensils. There were a few books on a shelf and a stack of magazines on the table. I unpacked my clothes, making the bed, and then opened one of the windows to let in some air. The silence inside was almost overwhelming. No hum of traffic or city noise, just the occasional bird call or the rustling of leaves outside. For someone like me, used to constant noise and distractions, it was oddly peaceful. That first afternoon, I decided to explore the surroundings. The cabin came with a map left by the host, showing some walking trails around the lake and through the forest. I followed a narrow path that wound through tall pine trees, their trunks straight and dark against the pale sky. The ground was covered with fallen needles and a few late wildflowers struggling against the cold. The air smelled of moss and damp wood. As I walked, I saw a few small animals. Squirrels darting up trees, a pair of deer grazing quietly in the distance. The forest felt alive but calm, untouched. I kept the path for nearly an hour before turning back to the cabin. My legs were tired from the walk, and I was looking forward to cooking dinner. Back at the cabin, I lit a small fire in the fireplace. It was an old iron stove that filled the room with warmth and a soft orange glow. I had brought some simple ingredients, a few vegetables, some chicken breasts, and bread. Cooking felt slower and more deliberate here, with nothing else to distract me. I chopped the vegetables carefully and stirred the chicken in the pan, the smells filling the small room. After dinner, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, wrapped in a blanket. The sky was dark now, the stars starting to peek through the clouds. The lake was smooth like glass, reflecting the faint light. I could hear the occasional splash of a fish or frog, and the distant sound of an owl. The next day, I planned to visit the nearby town, just a few miles down the road. It was a small place with a single grocery store, a diner, and a gas station. I needed some supplies, but mostly I wanted to see what life was like in this quiet corner of the world. I packed a small backpack with water, my camera, and a notebook. The town was exactly as I expected. Slow, quiet, and welcoming. People nodded as I passed by, and the diner smelled of coffee and frying bacon. I bought some fresh bread and eggs, chatted with the store clerk about the best hiking trails, and filled my water bottle. The town had that unhurried pace that city people often miss, where people knew each other's names and stopped to talk for a moment. Back at the cabin, I decided to take one of the longer trails the clerk had recommended. It led deeper into the forest and supposedly ended at a waterfall. I set out mid-morning, the sun higher in the sky now, warming the earth. The trail was rougher here, with rocks and roots to navigate, but it was peaceful. I took my time, stopping often to take photos of interesting trees, wild mushrooms, and patches of moss. After about an hour, I heard the sound of rushing water. The trail opened up to a clearing where a small waterfall tumbled down moss-covered rocks into a clear pool below. The water was cold and fast, sparkling in the sunlight. I sat on a nearby rock, letting the sound wash over me. It was the kind of place that made you forget everything else. The stress, the deadlines, the noise of the city. I stayed there for a long time, just breathing and watching the water. Eventually, I made my way back, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. That evening, I noticed a few things about the cabin that I hadn't seen before. The old wooden floor creaked softly when I walked. There was a faint smell of wood smoke that lingered even when the fire was out. The windows were drafty in places, and the curtains fluttered with the slightest breeze. I fixed some of the loose floorboards with the small toolkit the host had left behind. I also found a notebook on a shelf, filled with notes from previous guests. They wrote about the wildlife they saw, the books they read, the stars they watched. It was strange to feel connected to strangers through this simple book, all of us sharing this quiet space. The next day was colder. The sky was heavy with clouds, and a light drizzle began in the afternoon. I stayed inside, reading the books left behind by the host, a few novels and a thick history of the region. I cooked a slow stew on the stove, the smell filling the cabin. Outside, the rain tapped gently on the roof and windows. I sat by the window with my tea, watching the drops run down the glass. The world outside was gray and wet, but inside was warm and safe. I thought about how easy it was to forget the little things when you're busy. But here, everything felt simple and clear. On my last full day, I woke early to a bright blue sky. The rain had passed, leaving the air crisp and clean. I decided to take one more walk around the lake. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the water. I noticed how the light made the trees glow with a golden hue. As I walked, I found a small dock where the wood was worn smooth by years of use. I sat down, dipping my fingers in the cool water. There was a sense of peace here, something steady and lasting. I thought about the city waiting for me, the noise and rush, and how different this place was. Back at the cabin, I packed up my things slowly. I cleaned the kitchen, stacked the firewood, and closed the windows tightly against the coming night. Before leaving, I wrote a note for the host, thanking them for sharing the space. I left the notebook open on the shelf, adding my own entry about the quiet lake, the waterfall, and the warmth of the cabin. Driving away, I felt a calm I hadn't known in a long time. The forest and lake faded behind me, but the memory stayed, clear and steady. This trip wasn't about escaping forever, but about finding a moment to breathe, to slow down, and to remember what peace feels like. I had always been drawn to the idea of staying in unique places. When the chance came up to book an Airbnb for a weekend getaway, I didn't hesitate. It was just a random selection from a list of places in a quiet town about 2 hours away from the city where I lived. I wanted to get out of the usual hustle and spend some time alone, somewhere peaceful but with a touch of charm. The listing was simple. A small house, rustic but modern, with a garden and a porch that looked out onto a forested area. The pictures showed sunlight filtering through tall trees, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a neat kitchen that seemed perfect for cooking. The host was responsive, with clear instructions on how to check in. They provided detailed information on the nearest grocery stores, local attractions, and even left a printed map with handwritten notes. I liked how thorough and straightforward everything was. There was no need for small talk or complicated check-in rituals. Just a key hidden under a flower pot near the front door. The day I arrived, the weather was overcast but warm. The road leading up to the house was narrow, winding through dense woods that rustled softly with the breeze. The house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass that swayed gently. The air smelled fresh and earthy, a sharp contrast to the usual city smell of concrete and car exhaust. I parked my car near the porch, grabbed my bags, and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The front door opened into a small entryway lined with hooks for coats and shelves for shoes. The interior was exactly as the pictures had shown. Simple but comfortable. The wooden floors creaked slightly under my weight, adding a bit of warmth to the otherwise cool air inside. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and the furniture was a mix of light wood and neutral fabrics. The living room had a big window that looked out onto the trees, letting in just enough light to keep the space bright without making it feel cold. The fireplace was cold and empty, but the logs stacked nearby promised cozy evenings if I wanted to light a fire. I set my bags down and walked into the kitchen. It was small but well-equipped, with a gas stove, a fridge, and a few shelves stocked with plates, cups, and basic cooking utensils. The counter was clear except for a bowl of fresh fruit and a small vase of wildflowers. There was a handwritten note from the host welcoming me and inviting me to help myself to anything in the pantry. I liked the personal touch. After a quick unpack, I headed outside to explore the yard. The porch wrapped around the front and one side of the house, with a couple of wooden chairs and a small table. Beyond that was a garden with a mix of flowers, herbs, and some vegetables growing in neat rows. The far edge of the yard sloped gently down to where the forest began. I could see tall pine and oak trees standing close together, their branches swaying quietly in the breeze. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the paths that the host had marked on the map. The forest was peaceful and full of life. Birds called to each other from the treetops, and every now and then I spotted a squirrel darting up a tree or a rabbit moving quickly through the underbrush. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The light filtered softly through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. As the sun started to set, I returned to the house and prepared a simple dinner with the ingredients I had bought at the local grocery store earlier. I cooked some pasta with fresh tomatoes, garlic, and basil from the garden, enjoying the quiet hum of the kitchen as I worked. After dinner, I settled into one of the chairs on the porch with a cup of tea, watching as the sky turned a deep orange and pink before fading into dusk. The house felt safe and quiet, with only the sounds of nature around me. I stayed outside for a while longer, listening to the distant calls of owls and the soft rustling of leaves. The night air was cool but not cold, and the stars slowly appeared one by one, scattered across the dark sky. Inside, the bedroom was cozy and simple. The bed was made up with soft linens and several pillows. I liked the way the room was arranged, with a small desk by the window and a bookshelf filled with an assortment of novels and travel guides. I picked out a book to read and settled in for the night, feeling surprisingly relaxed. The next morning, I woke early to the sound of birds chirping just outside the window. The light was soft and golden, spilling gently into the room. I dressed quickly and made my way outside to the porch, where I sat with a cup of coffee, watching the day begin. The garden was bright and fresh, and a light breeze made the leaves of the trees rustle softly. I decided to spend the day exploring the nearby town. It was small but charming, with a main street lined with quaint shops and cafes. I wandered slowly, taking in the sights and sounds. The locals were friendly but reserved, nodding politely as I passed by. There was a farmer's market on the edge of town, where I bought fresh bread, cheese, and a small jar of honey. Back at the house, I cooked a simple lunch with my purchases and ate at the kitchen table, enjoying the quiet stillness. Afterward, I spent some time reading in the living room, the light shifting slowly as the afternoon moved on. That evening, I built a small fire in the fireplace. The crackling flames cast warm light across the room, making the space feel even cozier. I sat in the armchair nearby, wrapped in a soft blanket, and watched the fire dance. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the trees and making the house creak gently. I felt safe and comfortable, alone but not lonely. The following days passed much the same way. I fell into a slow rhythm, waking with the sun, exploring the forest or the town, cooking simple meals, and spending quiet evenings by the fire or on the porch. I noticed small things I hadn't before. The way the light changed throughout the day, the scent of the earth after a rain shower, the soft hum of insects in the garden. One afternoon, while walking in the woods, I found a small clearing I hadn't seen before. It was surrounded by tall trees, with soft moss covering the ground and a gentle stream running through it. I sat down on a fallen log and watched the water flow over smooth stones. The quiet was deep here, broken only by the gentle sound of the stream and the occasional bird call. Later, I returned to the house feeling calm and refreshed. I thought about how much I had needed this break, the chance to be somewhere different, to slow down and breathe. The house had been the perfect place for that. It was simple and unpretentious, but comfortable and welcoming. On my last night there, I took a long walk around the property, saying goodbye to the trees and the garden, the porch where I had spent so many peaceful hours, and the little house that had been my home for a few days. The sky was clear, the stars bright and steady. The next morning, I packed my things carefully, double-checking that I hadn't left anything behind. I left the key back where I had found it and took one last look around before getting into my car. As I drove away, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the time I had spent there and the chance to step out of my usual life, if only for a little while. The experience reminded me how important it is to find moments of calm and connection with nature, to slow down and appreciate the simple things. The Airbnb had been more than just a place to stay. It had been a small refuge, a pause from the noise and rush of everyday life. And that, in the end, was exactly what I had been looking for. I was searching for a place to stay for a few days during a work trip. The city I was going to visit had hotels, sure, but I wanted something different. somewhere quieter with a bit more character. That's when I stumbled on a small Airbnb listing on the outskirts of town. It was an old farmhouse converted into a rental. The photos showed a large wooden porch, some trees around, a modest garden, and inside cozy furniture, lots of natural light and simple decor. The price was reasonable, and it seemed like just the right place to unwind after long days of meetings. The host had good reviews. Quiet, private, and comfortable were words that popped up over and over. No mention of anything strange or unusual, just the usual. Peaceful stay, clean place, friendly host. So I booked it without hesitation. The day I arrived, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the country road that led to the farmhouse. The GPS had taken me through winding lanes, past fields that were just starting to turn gold with the coming fall. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked exactly as in the photos. Modest but inviting, with the smell of fresh wood and earth in the air. The porch creaked a little as I stepped onto it, and I could hear faint sounds of birds settling down for the evening. The door was unlocked as the host had promised, and inside, everything smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy at first but then grows comforting. I set down my bags and started to unpack. The kitchen was small but functional. There was a small fridge, a gas stove, a microwave, and a kettle. On the counter, a basket with some fresh apples and a handwritten note welcoming me. I liked that touch. The living room had a worn but soft sofa facing a small TV and a wood stove. There was a stack of firewood next to it. The floors were wooden and creaked underfoot. The walls were lined with framed pictures of the farmhouse in different seasons, and there were shelves with a few old books. I spent the first evening settling in, making some tea, and flipping through a book I had brought. The night outside was calm. I opened a window to let in the cool air, and I could hear the occasional rustling of leaves and distant sounds of cattle or wildlife. I was glad I had chosen this place to stay, away from the noise of the city, away from the endless hum of traffic and people. The next morning, I woke up early, around 6:30, to the soft light filtering through the curtains. I made coffee in the tiny kitchen and sat at the small wooden table by the window. The garden outside was bathed in golden sunlight. A few chickens wandered around near the back fence. I took my time, savoring the quiet and the view of fields stretching out into the distance. That day, I worked from the house using the strong Wi-Fi the host had promised. The host had also left some maps and brochures about local places, small farms, hiking trails, and a farmer's market that happened every Saturday in a nearby town. I made plans to visit it the next day. The farmhouse felt lived in but well cared for. I noticed small details, an old clock ticking in the hallway, a faded quilt on the bed, a ceramic vase with dried flowers on the kitchen counter. It was clear someone had taken care to make this house a home, even for short stays. Each day I followed a simple routine. Work in the mornings, a walk in the afternoon, reading or cooking dinner in the evening. One afternoon, I explored the area around the house. Just down the lane was a small pond surrounded by reeds. I sat there for a while watching the water and the sky reflect on its surface. The weather changed a few times during my stay. One day it was bright and sunny, the next rainy and cool. When it rained, the sound on the tin roof was steady and calming. I enjoyed those moments, curling up with a book and a blanket, the kettle boiling for hot tea. On my third night, I decided to light the wood stove. The air had turned chilly, and I wanted the warmth and the smell of burning wood. Gathering the firewood from the stack by the door, I arranged the logs carefully, struck a match, and soon the stove was crackling. The flames threw flickering shadows on the walls, and the warmth spread quickly through the room. That night I slept well. The bed was firm but comfortable, the sheets clean and soft. I woke early again, feeling rested. On the fourth day, I went to the farmer's market. It was small but lively. Local farmers sold fresh vegetables, homemade bread, honey, and jams. I bought a jar of raspberry jam and a loaf of sourdough bread. The people there were friendly, nodding or smiling as I walked by. The market had a simple charm, very different from the busy city markets I was used to. Back at the farmhouse, I made myself breakfast with fresh eggs I had bought from a neighbor who delivered eggs daily to the host. The eggs were rich and yellow, tasting of fresh farm life. One morning, I noticed the mail slot at the front door had a small stack of letters and newspapers. The host's mail, I guessed. I didn't touch it, but it made me think about the life this house had beyond my short stay. Throughout the week, I grew used to the sounds around me. The occasional bark of a dog, the crow of a rooster at dawn, the rustling of trees in the wind. The stars at night were incredibly bright here, far from city lights. There was a small bathroom with a shower, and the water pressure was good. Hot water came quickly, which was a relief after chilly mornings. The towels were thick and fresh. The soap smelled of pine. One afternoon, while I was washing dishes, I heard a car coming down the gravel driveway. It was the host returning for a few hours, as they had mentioned they would check on the house midweek. They didn't stay long, just tidied the porch and watered the plants. I didn't speak much, just a polite wave from the kitchen window. The farmhouse had an honesty box system for small things like firewood or extra cleaning, and I left some money as a thank you. By the last night, I felt like I belonged there, even if just for a moment. The place had a slow, steady rhythm that made it easy to breathe and think clearly. Packing my bags the next morning was a little sad. I had enjoyed the peacefulness, the simple life away from screens and noise. The farm smelled fresh, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet. Before I left, I opened the guest book the host had left on the coffee table. I wrote a note thanking them for the stay, saying the house felt like a refuge. I hoped they would continue to take care of it so others could enjoy the same quiet moments. Driving away, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. The farmhouse was small but stood proud, surrounded by trees and fields, waiting quietly for the next visitor. I had been planning this trip for months, though I hadn't made it obvious to anyone. Sometimes you just need to get away from everything and everyone, to a place where you can be alone with your thoughts. I wanted a change from my usual routine, the crowded city, the endless noise, the constant rush. So I decided to book an Airbnb somewhere far from all that, somewhere quiet and simple, yet comfortable enough to feel like a temporary home. I found a listing that looked perfect. A small, old cottage in the countryside, not too far from a small town but surrounded by fields and trees. The pictures showed a white wooden house with green shutters, a little porch with 2 chairs, and a garden full of wildflowers. It wasn't anything fancy, but it looked cozy, and that was exactly what I needed. The price was reasonable and the reviews were positive, so I booked it for a week. When the day came, I packed light, taking only the essentials. Some clothes, a few books, my laptop, and a journal I rarely used. I left early in the morning, taking a train to a town near the cottage, then a bus from there that took about half an hour through winding country roads. The bus stopped at a small village, and from there I walked the last mile to the cottage, pulling my small suitcase behind me on the gravel path. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. No cars, no people shouting, no distant sirens or music playing from open windows. Just birds singing and the soft rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. The air smelled fresh, like earth and grass and something faintly sweet, maybe wildflowers or fresh-cut hay. The cottage was even nicer in person. The white paint was a bit chipped in places, and the wood looked weathered, but it gave the house character. The green shutters were faded, but still bright against the white walls. The porch was just as in the pictures, with 2 wooden chairs that looked old but sturdy, and a small round table with a chipped enamel top. I put my bags down and took a deep breath. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The floor creaked slightly under my feet. The rooms were small but cozy, with simple furniture, an old wooden table, a few chairs, a small sofa with a worn-out cover, and a narrow bed in the corner of the main room. There was a tiny kitchen with an old stove, a fridge that hummed softly, and some shelves with basic dishes and pots. The windows let in a lot of light, but there were heavy curtains I could close if I wanted privacy or darkness at night. I dropped my bags on the floor and walked around, opening cabinets and checking the cupboards. Everything looked clean and ready, just as the host had promised. There was even a stack of firewood near the door, which surprised me since the weather was mild, but I thought it would be nice to have a fire in the evenings anyway. I unpacked a little, putting my clothes in the small wardrobe and laying my books on the table. I sat down on the sofa and looked around, feeling a strange mix of excitement and calm. This was going to be different from any trip I had taken before. No plans, no distractions. Just me and the quiet. That first afternoon, I went outside to explore the area. The cottage was surrounded by fields stretching in every direction, dotted with trees and wildflowers. A narrow dirt road ran past the house, leading towards the village I had passed through. I walked along it slowly, taking in the colors and smells. The sky was clear, a soft blue with only a few wisps of clouds. I passed a few farms with old barns and silos, and a couple of houses that looked similar to mine, small, weathered, with gardens full of flowers or vegetables. I noticed how different life was here compared to the city. Everything moved slower, quieter. People seemed to care about the land and the seasons, working outside, tending animals, fixing fences. I saw a few tractors parked near barns, and rows of crops stretching neatly across the fields. After walking for about an hour, I returned to the cottage, feeling pleasantly tired. I opened a window to let the cool air inside and made myself a simple dinner, a sandwich and some fruit I had brought with me. I sat on the porch and ate while watching the sun slowly set behind the trees. The sky turned pink and orange, and the light softened. That night I slept well. The bed was firmer than I was used to, but comfortable enough. The silence outside made it easier to fall asleep. No distant horns or sirens, no hum of air conditioners or voices, just quiet. Over the next few days, I settled into a routine. Mornings were for waking up slowly, making coffee on the stove, and sitting on the porch with my journal. I tried to write something every day, though the words didn't come easily. Sometimes I just sat and stared at the fields, watching birds or the occasional deer that passed by. Afternoons were for walks. I explored more of the area, sometimes following the dirt road towards the village, other times wandering down smaller paths through the woods or along the edges of fields. I discovered a small river nearby, with clear water flowing over smooth stones, and a wooden bridge that looked old but sturdy. I found a tiny store in the village where I bought fresh bread and eggs and sometimes milk. The store was small and basic, but it had everything I needed. The owner was a quiet older man who didn't say much but always smiled politely when I came in. One afternoon, I found a picnic table under a big oak tree near the river. I sat there for a while, eating a sandwich and watching the water flow. The sound of the river, the rustling leaves, and the occasional bird made it feel like the world had slowed down just for me. Evenings were my favorite time. I made simple dinners in the small kitchen, sometimes pasta, sometimes eggs and vegetables. I lit a small fire in the fireplace, even though it wasn't very cold outside. The firelight flickered and warmed the room, casting shadows on the walls. I sat on the sofa with a book or my journal, feeling calm and content. One night, as I was lying in bed, I looked out the window and saw the stars clearly for the first time in years. The sky was full of them, bright and countless, with no city lights to dim their glow. It felt peaceful and a little humbling, like being a small part of something much bigger. A few days later, I decided to explore the nearby town, which was about 20 minutes away by bus. It was small but lively, with a market square, a few shops, cafes, and a library. I spent some time walking through the streets, watching people going about their daily lives. It was quiet compared to the city I was used to, but it had a certain charm. I visited the library and borrowed a few books, enjoying the calm atmosphere and the smell of old paper. I also stopped by a small bakery and bought some fresh pastries, which I ate slowly on a bench outside. Back at the cottage, I noticed little things that made life here different but better in some ways. The simple pleasures, watching the sun rise and set, listening to the sounds of nature, cooking meals from scratch. I found myself waking up earlier, feeling more rested. My mind felt clearer. One morning, I woke up to the sound of rain tapping gently on the roof. It was the first rain since I arrived, and it was soft and steady. I stayed in bed a little longer, listening to the rhythm of the drops. When I finally got up, I made a pot of tea and sat by the window, watching the rain turn the fields dark and wet. The rain continued through the day, so I stayed inside, reading and writing. The cottage felt warm and cozy with the rain outside. I lit the fireplace again and wrapped myself in a blanket. For the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace. By the end of the week, I realized I hadn't felt this relaxed in years. The quiet and simplicity had given me a chance to slow down and reflect. I had time to think about my life, my work, my relationships, without distractions. Packing up on the last day was bittersweet. I didn't want to leave the calm and comfort of the cottage, but I knew I had to go back to reality eventually. I cleaned up the kitchen, made sure the fire was out, and checked all the doors and windows. Before leaving, I took one last walk around the garden and the fields. The sun was shining again, and the air was fresh and warm. I felt grateful for the time I had spent there and the chance to step away from everything. The bus took me back to the town, and from there I caught the train home. As the city skyline came into view, I felt a strange mix of sadness and readiness. The quiet of the countryside had given me a new perspective, and I was ready to face the noise and rush again, but in a different way. I knew I would come back someday, to that little cottage and the peaceful fields. It wasn't a magical place, and nothing strange happened there. It was just a simple house in the countryside, a place to rest and find calm. That week away taught me how important it is to slow down, to listen to the world around me, and to take care of myself. Sometimes, the best escape isn't about adventure or excitement. It's about finding a quiet corner where you can breathe and be yourself. And that was exactly what that little Airbnb had given me. I decided to take a break from my usual routine and book an Airbnb for a weekend getaway. The place I found was a small cabin located near a quiet lake, a few hours out of the city. The photos looked inviting. A modest wooden house surrounded by trees, with a little dock extending into the water. Promised peace and quiet, which was exactly what I needed. The drive out there was long but calming. As the city traffic disappeared behind me, the roads narrowed and the buildings thinned out, replaced by stretches of dense forest and open fields. The air felt fresher with each mile. I could already feel the tension in my shoulders starting to ease. When I finally arrived, the cabin was even better than the pictures suggested. It sat on a gentle slope, the front facing the lake. The water shimmered softly under the late afternoon sun. The wooden exterior of the cabin was weathered but sturdy, with a small porch that had a couple of old rocking chairs and a rusty grill off to one side. The place looked like it had been around for a while, but it was well cared for. I grabbed my bags and unlocked the door using the code the host had sent me earlier. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of pine and wood smoke. It was simple but cozy, with a small living room that had a worn sofa and a few shelves lined with books and board games. The kitchen was basic but clean, with a stove, a fridge, and a small dining table tucked into the corner. The bedroom was just big enough for a double bed, with thick blankets folded at the foot. There was a small bathroom with a shower, all functional but not fancy. I took a moment to look around and let the silence settle in. There were no noises from neighbors, no cars, no city hum, just the occasional chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. I unpacked a few things and decided to explore the area before it got dark. The path down to the lake was narrow but easy to follow, lined with bushes and wildflowers. When I reached the water's edge, I saw that the dock was old but still solid. I stepped onto it and sat down, letting my feet dangle over the side. The lake was calm, reflecting the sky and the surrounding trees. A gentle wind stirred the water's surface, creating little ripples. I spent a good hour just sitting there, watching the sun dip closer to the horizon. The sky turned orange and pink, then purple. I could feel the day's worries fading away with the light. As the evening came, I made my way back to the cabin. I gathered some dry wood from a pile near the porch and started a small fire in the fire pit. The flames crackled and popped, giving off warmth and light. I roasted a few marshmallows I had brought with me, enjoying their sweet, sticky taste. Inside, I made a simple dinner with pasta and sauce, eating while sitting on the sofa and looking out the window at the dark lake. The only light was from the fire and the stars beginning to appear in the sky. It was peaceful in a way that felt rare. After dinner, I prepared for bed. The mattress was firm but comfortable, and the blankets were thick enough to keep out the chill. I lay down and listened to the sounds outside. The occasional splash from the lake, the rustle of small animals moving in the underbrush, the distant call of an owl. It felt strange but not unsettling, like being completely alone but safe. I slept deeply that night. The quiet and fresh air seemed to work better than any medicine. The next morning, I woke early to the soft light filtering through the curtains. I pulled back the window and took a deep breath. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I stepped outside, the grass still damp with dew. I made coffee using the small stove, the aroma filling the cabin. I took my mug back out to the porch and sat in one of the rocking chairs, watching the lake slowly come to life as the sun rose higher. Mist hovered over the water in thin wisps, and the trees glistened with droplets. For breakfast, I had some toast and fruit, then decided to take a walk along the lakeshore. The path was quiet, with the sounds of birdsong and the occasional rustle of small creatures in the bushes. The water was clear and cold, and I dipped my fingers in as I walked. Further down the shore, I noticed a small wooden rowboat tied to a post. It looked old but usable. I untied it and carefully got in, using the oars to push off the dock. The boat moved smoothly over the water, the only sound the soft splash of oars dipping in and out. I drifted across the lake, surrounded by nothing but trees and sky. The water was cool and clear beneath me. I felt a calmness that I hadn't realized I was missing. After a while, I returned to shore and headed back to the cabin. I spent the afternoon reading a book from the shelf, occasionally stepping outside to stretch or sit by the fire pit. The peacefulness of the place was like a balm to my busy mind. That evening, I cooked dinner again, this time a simple soup made from canned vegetables and broth I had brought along. The fire crackled outside, and I sat watching the stars emerge one by one, the Milky Way visible as a soft band across the sky. The night was cool, and the cabin held the warmth from the fire and the thick blankets. I fell asleep easily. The next day, I decided to explore a little further. There was a small dirt road that led from the cabin toward a nearby town a few miles away. I packed a small backpack with some snacks, water, and my phone and set out on foot. The road was quiet, winding through dense forest and open fields. I passed occasional houses spaced far apart. The forest was alive with birds, insects, and the faint rustle of animals. The scent of pine and earth was strong. After about an hour's walk, I reached the edge of a small town. It was a quiet place with a few shops, a gas station, and a cafe. I stopped at the cafe and bought a sandwich and a coffee, then found a bench in the shade to rest. Watching the slow pace of life, there was a contrast to the city I came from. People greeted each other with smiles and waves. The air was fresher, and the noise was mostly birdsong and distant tractors. After resting, I headed back along the road, enjoying the peacefulness of the walk. Back at the cabin, I spent the rest of the day doing small chores, tidying up, gathering firewood, washing dishes. The simplicity of the tasks was comforting, a break from constant screens and deadlines. That night, I sat by the fire pit again, letting the flames warm me. The sky was clear, and the stars shone bright. The next morning, I packed up my things slowly. I didn't want to leave, but life called me back. Before locking the door, I walked one last time to the lake and sat on the dock. The water was calm, reflecting the early light. I took a deep breath and felt grateful for the quiet and rest the place had given me. Driving back toward the city, the trees thinned and the buildings grew taller. The sounds of traffic and people returned, but inside me, I carried a calmness that would last. The weekend away at the cabin was simple and quiet, but it reminded me how important it is to slow down and find peace in small things. The clean air, the natural beauty, and the stillness had helped me reset in a way nothing else had for a long time. I had had booked an Airbnb stay in a small town that I had never visited before. It was a place I chose randomly while browsing for a quiet weekend escape. The listing caught my eye because it was a modest, standalone cottage located just outside the town center. The photos showed a small, neat house with white walls, a dark roof, and a wooden porch with a swing. The surrounding garden was simple, with a few flower beds and a patch of green lawn. It looked peaceful, away from the busy city life I was used to. I arrived late afternoon on a Friday. The weather was mild, with a gentle breeze and soft sunlight filtering through tall trees lining the narrow road that led to the cottage. The air smelled fresh, mixed with earth and blooming flowers. Parking was easy, just a small gravel space beside the house. The gravel crunched softly under my shoes as I approached the front door, which was painted a pale blue. The house felt quiet and welcoming. Inside, the cottage was small but well cared for. The floor was wooden, with a warm tone that added comfort. The living room had a low sofa with a knitted throw draped over the armrest, a small wooden coffee table, and a bookshelf neatly arranged with books and magazines. A few framed pictures of landscapes hung on the walls. The kitchen was compact but functional, with all the basic appliances: a stove, a small fridge, a microwave, and a kettle. There was a dining table for two by the window, overlooking the garden. I unpacked my bag in the bedroom, which had a simple bed with clean white sheets and a couple of pillows. A bedside table held a small lamp and an alarm clock. The window was open slightly, letting in the soft sound of birds and rustling leaves. The bathroom was small but tidy, with a shower, sink, and a shelf stocked with clean towels and basic toiletries. After settling in, I walked around the garden. The grass was a bit uneven but green, dotted with dandelions and clover. A few bees buzzed around the flowers. At the back of the house, there was a small wooden bench under a maple tree. It was a good spot to sit quietly and watch the clouds move across the sky. That evening, I cooked a simple dinner in the kitchen. Pasta with a tomato sauce I had brought along. The pots and pans were clean, and the stove worked well. I ate at the dining table, looking out at the dimming garden as the sun set. The sky turned a soft pink, then deep blue. The only sounds were the occasional chirp of a cricket and the distant hum of a car on the road. After dinner, I read a book in the living room, sitting on the sofa with the lamp casting a warm glow. The house felt calm and safe. The quiet was a relief after the noise of the city. When I went to bed, the cool night air drifted through the open window, carrying the scent of pine and earth. The next morning, I woke up early to the light filtering in through the curtains. The air inside the house was cool but fresh. I brewed coffee in the small kitchen and took it outside to the wooden bench. Sitting there, sipping my coffee, I watched the garden come alive. A few birds hopped on the lawn, searching for seeds. The sky was clear, and the sun warmed my face. I decided to explore the town. It was a short walk from the cottage, following a narrow road lined with tall trees and small houses. The town was quiet but charming, with a main street that had a few shops and a bakery. The bakery smelled of fresh bread and pastries, and I bought a small croissant to take back to the cottage. Back at the house, I spent the afternoon reading, writing in my journal, and taking photos of the garden and nearby trees. I liked the way the light changed through the day, the shadows shifting slowly, the colors of the leaves brightening. I found a small path behind the cottage that led into a forested area. The trees were tall and close together, and the ground was covered with fallen leaves and pine needles. I walked for a while, enjoying the quiet and the fresh smell of the woods. That evening, I made a simple soup and ate it at the dining table. The house was quiet again, with only the occasional sound of a car or a dog barking in the distance. I took a warm shower, then settled into bed with a book. The night was cool, and I closed the window before sleeping. On the third day, the weather turned a little cloudy. I decided to do some light cleaning and organizing inside the cottage. I wiped down surfaces, swept the floor, and opened the windows to air out the rooms. The house was small but easy to keep tidy. I found some magazines on the shelf and flipped through them while sitting on the sofa. In the afternoon, I noticed a small shed at the side of the garden. It was made of wood and painted white, with a green door. Curious, I opened it and found gardening tools inside. A rake, a shovel, some pots and bags of soil. There was also a small stack of firewood neatly piled against one wall. The shed smelled of dry wood and earth. I spent some time in the garden, pulling a few weeds and watering the plants with a small hose I found near the shed. It was satisfying to work with my hands, even if just a little. The garden felt cared for, but it also had a wild, natural look with grass growing unevenly and flowers spreading freely. That evening, I cooked another simple meal, scrambled eggs with vegetables, and ate it while watching a documentary on my laptop. The Wi-Fi signal was good enough for streaming, which was convenient. I felt relaxed and disconnected from the busy world. On the last morning, I woke up early again and brewed coffee. I sat on the bench, looking around the garden one last time. The leaves on the trees were starting to change color with the season, from green to shades of yellow and orange. The air smelled fresh and a little crisp. I packed my bags slowly, taking my time. I checked every corner of the house to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. Before locking the door, I walked around the garden once more, enjoying the quiet and the peacefulness. As I drove away, the cottage disappeared behind the trees, looking small and calm. The trip was simple but exactly what I needed. A quiet place to rest, with fresh air and gentle nature. No excitement, no drama, just a few days of normal life in a small, well-kept house. It was a reminder that sometimes the best travel stories aren't about big adventures, but about finding a quiet moment to breathe and slow down. I had been searching for a place to stay for a weekend getaway, somewhere quiet but not too far from the city. After scrolling through countless Airbnb listings, I finally picked a small cabin tucked away in the outskirts of a rural town. The photos showed a wooden house surrounded by tall pine trees, a small porch with a couple of chairs, and large windows that let in plenty of light. It looked simple, clean, and inviting. The price was reasonable and the reviews were positive, so I decided to book it for 2 nights. On the day of the trip, I packed my bags with everything I thought I would need. Clothes for changing weather, a small cooler with some food and drinks, a book to read, and my phone charger. I double-checked the address and loaded it into the GPS. The drive was about 2 hours from my apartment, mostly along quiet country roads that twisted through forests and small farms. The sky was clear and the sun was warm, but I knew the temperature could drop quickly after sunset. As I approached the town, the buildings thinned out, replaced by fields and patches of woods. I turned onto a narrow gravel road, surrounded by dense trees on both sides. The road shook the car a bit as I drove slower to avoid potholes. After a few more minutes, I saw the cabin on the right side, partially hidden by a row of tall pines. It was just as in the pictures. A small, single-story wooden house with a steep roof and a stone chimney. There was a simple mailbox near the driveway with the house number, and a few scattered logs stacked beside the porch. I parked the car on a cleared patch of dirt next to the house and stepped outside. The air smelled fresh, a mix of pine and earth. The wind moved gently through the trees, making the leaves rustle softly. I took a deep breath and felt a calmness settle in. The front porch was made of wide wooden planks, a bit rough underfoot but sturdy. 2 old wooden chairs sat facing the small yard, which was bordered by wild grass and a few bright wildflowers. A narrow stone path led from the porch around to the back of the house. The windows were clean but thick with reflections from the sun. I pulled the key from the lockbox hanging near the door, using the code the host had sent me earlier. The lock clicked open smoothly. Inside, the cabin smelled faintly of wood and old paint. The floor was hardwood, polished but showing some scratches from years of use. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and simple framed pictures of forests and mountains hung here and there. The furniture was modest but comfortable looking. A small couch against one wall, a wooden table with 2 chairs, a narrow bookshelf filled with well-worn books and magazines. I dropped my bags by the door and walked over to the kitchen area. It was compact with a small fridge, a stove with 4 burners, a microwave, and a few cabinets. There was a kettle and some basic cookware. The countertops were clean but showed signs of age, with small chips and stains. On the windowsill above the sink, there were a couple of potted herbs, basil and rosemary, that looked healthy. I set the cooler down and pulled out a bottle of water and some sandwiches I had made. The cabin had no Wi-Fi advertised, so I knew this trip was going to be about disconnecting, which I welcomed. My phone signal was weak but enough for emergencies. After unpacking a little, I explored the rest of the cabin. There was one bedroom with a queen-sized bed, a simple wooden dresser, and a small nightstand with a lamp. The bed was neatly made with thick blankets and a few pillows. The window there gave a clear view of the woods behind the house. The bathroom was tiny but clean, with a shower, a sink, and a small cabinet stocked with extra towels and toiletries. Once I settled in, I grabbed my book and sat on the porch chair. The sun was starting to lower behind the trees, casting long shadows on the ground. The sounds of nature surrounded me. Birds chirping, leaves rustling, and the occasional distant bark of a dog. It was quiet in a way that felt both peaceful and strange, like the world had slowed down here. After a while, I decided to take a walk around the property. The backyard was uneven but mostly grassy, leading into the dense forest. I followed a narrow dirt trail that seemed to have been made by previous visitors or wildlife. The forest was thick with tall pines and scattered birch trees, their white bark bright against the dark green. The ground was soft with moss and pine needles. Here and there, patches of wild berries grew low to the ground. As I walked deeper into the woods, I noticed how the sunlight filtered through the branches, creating shifting patterns of light and shadow. The air smelled cooler and fresher. I kept an eye out for birds or small animals, but only saw a few squirrels darting between the trees. After about 30 minutes, I turned back toward the cabin, feeling a little tired but refreshed. The sun had almost set, and the sky was painted with soft pinks and purples. I could see the porch light glowing warmly through the window. Back inside, I made a small dinner with the food I had brought. The stove hissed as I heated some soup, and the cabin filled with a faint steam smell. I ate slowly, enjoying the quiet and the simple flavors. Once done, I cleaned the dishes carefully and set them to dry by the sink. As night fell, I lit a small candle on the table. The cabin became cozy and warm in the soft, flickering light. I sat back on the couch and read my book for a while, feeling the silence wrap around me like a blanket. Outside, the sounds of the forest had changed. The chirping of crickets had replaced the birds, and the wind whispered gently through the branches. Later, I prepared for bed. The blankets were thick and soft, perfect for the cool night air that would surely come. I left the window slightly open to let in some fresh air and closed my eyes, listening to the peaceful sounds outside. Morning came slowly. The soft light filtered through the curtains, and the smell of pine filled the air. I stretched and got up, feeling rested. I opened the window fully, letting the fresh, cool air wake me up. The forest looked bright and alive in the early sun. I brewed some coffee using the small drip pot I found in the kitchen. The warm smell filled the room as I sat at the table, sipping slowly while watching the trees sway gently outside. I spent the day doing simple things: reading more, taking another walk through the forest, and taking pictures of the wildflowers and tall trees. The quiet was constant but comforting, a sharp contrast to the noise and rush of the city. I thought about the way nature could be both calm and powerful at the same time. In the afternoon, I went further along the forest path. I found a small creek, its water clear and cool, bubbling over smooth stones. I sat on a flat rock nearby, watching leaves float by and listening to the gentle sound of water. There was no one else around, just the natural world moving at its own pace. As evening came again, I cooked a simple meal on the stove, feeling content with the day I had spent alone but not lonely. I lit the candle and read some more before getting ready for bed. The next morning, I packed my things slowly, taking my time to make sure I left the cabin clean and as I had found it. I felt a strange sadness leaving this place where time seemed to slow down and worries melted away. Before driving off, I stood on the porch one last time, breathing in the cool morning air and looking out at the forest. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting golden light over the trees and the cabin. I felt grateful for this quiet escape, this small refuge from the busy world. I locked the door behind me and started the car, ready to head back to my usual life. But I knew that the calm and peace I found here would stay with me a long time. I had always been drawn to the idea of staying in unique places. When the chance came up to book an Airbnb for a weekend getaway, I didn't hesitate. It was just a random selection from a list of places in a quiet town about 2 hours away from the city where I lived. I wanted to get out of the usual hustle and spend some time alone, somewhere peaceful but with a touch of charm. The listing was simple. A small house, rustic but modern, with a garden and a porch that looked out onto a forested area. The pictures showed sunlight filtering through tall trees, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a neat kitchen that seemed perfect for cooking. The host was responsive, with clear instructions on how to check in. They provided detailed information on the nearest grocery stores, local attractions, and even left a printed map with handwritten notes. I liked how thorough and straightforward everything was. There was no need for small talk or complicated check-in rituals. Just a key hidden under a flower pot near the front door. The day I arrived, the weather was overcast but warm. The road leading up to the house was narrow, winding through dense woods that rustled softly with the breeze. The house sat at the end of a gravel driveway, surrounded by wildflowers and tall grass that swayed gently. The air smelled fresh and earthy, a sharp contrast to the usual city smell of concrete and car exhaust. I parked my car near the porch, grabbed my bags, and took a deep breath before stepping inside. The front door opened into a small entryway lined with hooks for coats and shelves for shoes. The interior was exactly as the pictures had shown. Simple but comfortable. The wooden floors creaked slightly under my weight, adding a bit of warmth to the otherwise cool air inside. The walls were painted a soft cream color, and the furniture was a mix of light wood and neutral fabrics. The living room had a big window that looked out onto the trees, letting in just enough light to keep the space bright without making it feel cold. The fireplace was cold and empty, but the logs stacked nearby promised cozy evenings if I wanted to light a fire. I set my bags down and walked into the kitchen. It was small but well-equipped, with a gas stove, a fridge, and a few shelves stocked with plates, cups, and basic cooking utensils. The counter was clear except for a bowl of fresh fruit and a small vase of wildflowers. There was a handwritten note from the host welcoming me and inviting me to help myself to anything in the pantry. I liked the personal touch. After a quick unpack, I headed outside to explore the yard. The porch wrapped around the front and one side of the house, with a couple of wooden chairs and a small table. Beyond that was a garden with a mix of flowers, herbs, and some vegetables growing in neat rows. The far edge of the yard sloped gently down to where the forest began. I could see tall pine and oak trees standing close together, their branches swaying quietly in the breeze. I spent the rest of the afternoon walking the paths that the host had marked on the map. The forest was peaceful and full of life. Birds called to each other from the treetops, and every now and then I spotted a squirrel darting up a tree or a rabbit moving quickly through the underbrush. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of pine needles and damp earth. The light filtered softly through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground. As the sun started to set, I returned to the house and prepared a simple dinner with the ingredients I had bought at the local grocery store earlier. I cooked some pasta with fresh tomatoes, garlic, and basil from the garden, enjoying the quiet hum of the kitchen as I worked. After dinner, I settled into one of the chairs on the porch with a cup of tea, watching as the sky turned a deep orange and pink before fading into dusk. The house felt safe and quiet, with only the sounds of nature around me. I stayed outside for a while longer, listening to the distant calls of owls and the soft rustling of leaves. The night air was cool but not cold, and the stars slowly appeared one by one, scattered across the dark sky. Inside, the bedroom was cozy and simple. The bed was made up with soft linens and several pillows. I liked the way the room was arranged, with a small desk by the window and a bookshelf filled with an assortment of novels and travel guides. I picked out a book to read and settled in for the night, feeling surprisingly relaxed. The next morning, I woke early to the sound of birds chirping just outside the window. The light was soft and golden, spilling gently into the room. I dressed quickly and made my way outside to the porch, where I sat with a cup of coffee, watching the day begin. The garden was bright and fresh, and a light breeze made the leaves of the trees rustle softly. I decided to spend the day exploring the nearby town. It was small but charming, with a main street lined with quaint shops and cafes. I wandered slowly, taking in the sights and sounds. The locals were friendly but reserved, nodding politely as I passed by. There was a farmer's market on the edge of town, where I bought fresh bread, cheese, and a small jar of honey. Back at the house, I cooked a simple lunch with my purchases and ate at the kitchen table, enjoying the quiet stillness. Afterward, I spent some time reading in the living room, the light shifting slowly as the afternoon moved on. That evening, I built a small fire in the fireplace. The crackling flames cast warm light across the room, making the space feel even cozier. I sat in the armchair nearby, wrapped in a soft blanket, and watched the fire dance. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling the trees and making the house creak gently. I felt safe and comfortable, alone but not lonely. The following days passed much the same way. I fell into a slow rhythm, waking with the sun, exploring the forest or the town, cooking simple meals, and spending quiet evenings by the fire or on the porch. I noticed small things I hadn't before. The way the light changed throughout the day, the scent of the earth after a rain shower, the soft hum of insects in the garden. One afternoon, while walking in the woods, I found a small clearing I hadn't seen before. It was surrounded by tall trees, with soft moss covering the ground and a gentle stream running through it. I sat down on a fallen log and watched the water flow over smooth stones. The quiet was deep here, broken only by the gentle sound of the stream and the occasional bird call. Later, I returned to the house feeling calm and refreshed. I thought about how much I had needed this break, the chance to be somewhere different, to slow down and breathe. The house had been the perfect place for that. It was simple and unpretentious, but comfortable and welcoming. On my last night there, I took a long walk around the property, saying goodbye to the trees and the garden, the porch where I had spent so many peaceful hours, and the little house that had been my home for a few days. The sky was clear, the stars bright and steady. The next morning, I packed my things carefully, double-checking that I hadn't left anything behind. I left the key back where I had found it and took one last look around before getting into my car. As I drove away, I felt a quiet sense of gratitude for the time I had spent there and the chance to step out of my usual life, if only for a little while. The experience reminded me how important it is to find moments of calm and connection with nature, to slow down and appreciate the simple things. The Airbnb had been more than just a place to stay. It had been a small refuge, a pause from the noise and rush of everyday life. And that, in the end, was exactly what I had been looking for. I was searching for a place to stay for a few days during a work trip. The city I was going to visit had hotels, sure, but I wanted something different, somewhere quieter with a bit more character. That's when I stumbled on a small Airbnb listing on the outskirts of town. It was an old farmhouse converted into a rental. The photos showed a large wooden porch, some trees around, a modest garden, and inside cozy furniture, lots of natural light and simple decor. The price was reasonable, and it seemed like just the right place to unwind after long days of meetings. The host had good reviews, quiet, private, and comfortable were words that popped up over and over. No mention of anything strange or unusual, just the usual. Peaceful stay, clean place, friendly host. So I booked it without hesitation. The day I arrived, the sun was low in the sky, casting long shadows over the country road that led to the farmhouse. The GPS had taken me through winding lanes, past fields that were just starting to turn gold with the coming fall. When I finally pulled into the gravel driveway, the house looked exactly as in the photos. Modest but inviting, with the smell of fresh wood and earth in the air. The porch creaked a little as I stepped onto it, and I could hear faint sounds of birds settling down for the evening. The door was unlocked as the host had promised, and inside, everything smelled faintly of lavender and wood polish. The place was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy at first but then grows comforting. I set down my bags and started to unpack. The kitchen was small but functional. There was a small fridge, a gas stove, a microwave, and a kettle. On the counter, a basket with some fresh apples and a handwritten note welcoming me. I liked that touch. The living room had a worn but soft sofa facing a small TV and a wood stove. There was a stack of firewood next to it. The floors were wooden and creaked underfoot. The walls were lined with framed pictures of the farmhouse in different seasons, and there were shelves with a few old books. I spent the first evening settling in, making some tea, and flipping through a book I had brought. The night outside was calm. I opened a window to let in the cool air, and I could hear the occasional rustling of leaves and distant sounds of cattle or wildlife. I was glad I had chosen this place to stay, away from the noise of the city, away from the endless hum of traffic and people. The next morning, I woke up early, around 6:30, to the soft light filtering through the curtains. I made coffee in the tiny kitchen and sat at the small wooden table by the window. The garden outside was bathed in golden sunlight. A few chickens wandered around near the back fence. I took my time, savoring the quiet and the view of fields stretching out into the distance. That day, I worked from the house using the strong Wi-Fi the host had promised. The host had also left some maps and brochures about local places, small farms, hiking trails, and a farmer's market that happened every Saturday in a nearby town. I made plans to visit it the next day. The farmhouse felt lived in but well cared for. I noticed small details, an old clock ticking in the hallway, a faded quilt on the bed, a ceramic vase with dried flowers on the kitchen counter. It was clear someone had taken care to make this house a home, even for short stays. Each day I followed a simple routine. Work in the mornings, a walk in the afternoon, reading or cooking dinner in the evening. One afternoon, I explored the area around the house. Just down the lane was a small pond surrounded by reeds. I sat there for a while watching the water and the sky reflect on its surface. The weather changed a few times during my stay. One day it was bright and sunny, the next rainy and cool. When it rained, the sound on the tin roof was steady and calming. I enjoyed those moments, curling up with a book and a blanket, the kettle boiling for hot tea. On my third night, I decided to light the wood stove. The air had turned chilly, and I wanted the warmth and the smell of burning wood. Gathering the firewood from the stack by the door, I arranged the logs carefully, struck a match, and soon the stove was crackling. The flames threw flickering shadows on the walls, and the warmth spread quickly through the room. That night I slept well. The bed was firm but comfortable, the sheets clean and soft. I woke early again, feeling rested. On the fourth day, I went to the farmer's market. It was small but lively. Local farmers sold fresh vegetables, homemade bread, honey, and jams. I bought a jar of raspberry jam and a loaf of sourdough bread. The people there were friendly, nodding or smiling as I walked by. The market had a simple charm, very different from the busy city markets I was used to. Back at the farmhouse, I made myself breakfast with fresh eggs I had bought from a neighbor who delivered eggs daily to the host. The eggs were rich and yellow, tasting of fresh farm life. One morning, I noticed the mail slot at the front door had a small stack of letters and newspapers. The host's mail, I guessed. I didn't touch it, but it made me think about the life this house had beyond my short stay. Throughout the week, I grew used to the sounds around me. The occasional bark of a dog, the crow of a rooster at dawn, the rustling of trees in the wind. The stars at night were incredibly bright here, far from city lights. There was a small bathroom with a shower, and the water pressure was good. Hot water came quickly, which was a relief after chilly mornings. The towels were thick and fresh. The soap smelled of pine. One afternoon, while I was washing dishes, I heard a car coming down the gravel driveway. It was the host returning for a few hours, as they had mentioned they would check on the house midweek. They didn't stay long, just tidied the porch and watered the plants. I didn't speak much, just a polite wave from the kitchen window. The farmhouse had an honesty box system for small things like firewood or extra cleaning, and I left some money as a thank you. By the last night, I felt like I belonged there, even if just for a moment. The place had a slow, steady rhythm that made it easy to breathe and think clearly. Packing my bags the next morning was a little sad. I had enjoyed the peacefulness, the simple life away from screens and noise. The farm smelled fresh, the wooden floor cool beneath my feet. Before I left, I opened the guest book the host had left on the coffee table. I wrote a note thanking them for the stay, saying the house felt like a refuge. I hoped they would continue to take care of it so others could enjoy the same quiet moments. Driving away, I took one last look in the rearview mirror. The farmhouse was small but stood proud, surrounded by trees and fields, waiting quietly for the next visitor. I found the Airbnb listing late one evening when I was scrolling through options for a weekend getaway. The pictures showed a small, cozy cabin tucked into the woods near a quiet lake. The place looked simple but well kept. Wooden walls with a few rustic decorations, large windows facing the trees, and a small porch with a couple of chairs. The price was reasonable, and the reviews mentioned peacefulness and privacy. I was craving a break from the city's noise and my routine, so I booked it for 2 nights without much thought. When I arrived late on Friday afternoon, the sun was already low, casting long shadows over the dirt road leading up to the cabin. The air smelled of pine and damp earth, a sharp contrast to the smell of cars and exhaust fumes back home. The gravel crunching under my tires was the only sound as I parked near the cabin, the wooden porch steps worn but sturdy under my feet. The door was unlocked with a key left inside a small lockbox, instructions that the host had emailed me earlier. I pulled the heavy wooden door open, and the first thing that struck me was the smell of aged wood mixed with a faint hint of lavender, probably some air freshener. The place was tidy, but you could tell it had been lived in often. A few pairs of hiking boots by the door, a basket with some kindling for the fireplace, and a stack of old magazines on the coffee table suggested this was a place people came to unwind and disconnect. The living room was small but inviting. A plaid rug covered most of the wooden floor, and a stone fireplace dominated one wall. There was a modest kitchen area with a small fridge, a stove, and a counter with some basic utensils and dishes. A small dining table sat near the window with 2 chairs, offering a view of the woods outside. I set my bag down and looked out the window, watching the wind move through the trees, the leaves rustling softly. It was quiet here, the kind of quiet that makes you aware of your own breathing and the small creaks the cabin made as it settled into the cooling evening. I started a fire in the fireplace using the kindling provided. The crackling flames soon brought warmth to the room. I unpacked some food I'd brought, simple sandwiches, some fruit, and a few snacks. There was no internet here, the listing had said, and I had decided that was part of the appeal. No distractions, no emails, no calls. Just me and the quiet. As night fell, the cabin grew colder, the temperature dropping quickly once the sun disappeared. The fire was the only source of light and warmth. I read one of the magazines by the firelight before heading to the small bedroom. The bed was narrow but comfortable, with thick blankets folded neatly at the foot. The window next to the bed framed a star-filled sky, clearer than any I'd seen in the city. Sleep came easily that night, though the unfamiliar sounds of the forest, an owl hooting far off, the rustle of small animals in the brush, kept me lightly aware in the background. I woke a few times, the temperature dropping even further, but the thick blankets and the fire's warmth kept me comfortable. Morning brought a pale light filtering through the curtains. I made coffee on the stove and sat on the porch, wrapped in a jacket against the chilly air. The lake was just a short walk away, its surface still and mirror-like in the early light. The woods around the cabin were alive with the sounds of birds beginning their day, the occasional snap of a twig underfoot as a squirrel or deer passed through. I spent the day exploring the area, walking along the lake's edge, picking my way carefully over roots and rocks. There was a small dock that extended a little into the water, though it looked a little rickety and worn. The water was cold and clear, and I sat for a while watching it lap gently against the shore. Back at the cabin, I found a stack of firewood under a small lean-to beside the porch. I gathered some for the evening, knowing the temperature would drop again. The kitchen had a small basket of spices and some cooking oil, and I decided to make a simple dinner, pasta with a canned sauce I'd brought along. The evening came again, colder than the day, and I lit the fire once more. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. The quiet settled into a different rhythm now, deeper and more intense as darkness closed in. I felt the solitude settle over me, a strange mixture of peace and something else, harder to put into words. Not fear exactly, but a heightened awareness. I prepared for bed early, feeling the weight of the day's fresh air and exercise. Before sleeping, I made sure the fire was safely covered with the screen, double-checked the door, and looked out the window one last time. The moon was thin, casting a faint light over the trees. The second night was colder, and the fire didn't last as long. I could hear more of the forest's night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the snap of branches somewhere deeper in the woods. I didn't feel unsafe, but I was aware of my isolation. The next morning, I woke earlier than before. The air inside the cabin was chilly and crisp. Outside, the first light of dawn painted the sky in pale pinks and blues. I packed my things slowly, savoring the last moments in the quiet. As I walked back to my car, I noticed a few things I hadn't before. An old tire swing hanging from a large oak tree, the faint remains of a campfire circle near the edge of the woods, a trail leading deeper into the forest that I hadn't seen on my first walk. The place felt lived in, used by locals or previous visitors, but still very much in tune with nature. Driving away, the quiet of the cabin stayed with me. It wasn't a story of excitement or fear, but of small details and moments that come when you step out of your usual life and into a simpler, quieter world. The kind of place that makes you slow down and notice the air, the trees, the light. That weekend in the cabin wasn't about adventure or discovery, but about a pause. A moment to breathe and listen to the world without interruption. The memory of the quiet, the smell of pine, the crackling fire, those stayed with me longer than I expected. Sometimes you don't need something extraordinary to make a trip worthwhile. Sometimes the ordinary moments lived fully and simply are enough. I booked the Airbnb on a random night when I couldn't sleep. I had a few days off work and felt burned out in a way that sleep at home wasn't fixing anymore. The listing was simple. A small house on the edge of a quiet town. No close neighbors, cheap price, good reviews. The pictures showed clean rooms, white walls, plain furniture, nothing fancy. That was fine with me. I didn't want anything special. I just wanted quiet. The drive there took almost 6 hours. The farther I went, the less traffic there was. Gas stations became farther apart. Phone signal dropped in and out. The town itself was smaller than I expected. One main road, a grocery store, a closed diner, and a few houses spread far apart. The Airbnb was another 10 minutes past the town, down a narrow road with trees on both sides. No street lights, just my headlights cutting through the dark. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked exactly like the pictures. One floor, light-colored siding, a small porch, and a gravel driveway. There was a lockbox on the door. I parked, grabbed my bag, and unlocked the door. Inside, the air felt stale, like the house had been closed up for a while. It wasn't dirty, just still. The living room had a couch, a small TV, and a coffee table with nothing on it. The kitchen was clean. No food, no trash, no signs anyone had been there recently. I walked through the whole place before unpacking. One bedroom, one bathroom, a small laundry room. Everything felt normal. Too normal, almost empty in a way that made every sound stand out. My footsteps echoed more than they should have. When I set my bag down, the zipper sounded loud enough to make me pause. That first night was quiet. No strange noises, no problems. I ate some food I brought with me and watched TV. Around midnight, I went to bed. The mattress was firm, the kind that makes your back ache if you move the wrong way. I slept, but lightly. I woke up a few times for no real reason, just the feeling that the place was unfamiliar. The second day was when things started to feel off, but not in a dramatic way. More like small details stacking up. When I woke up, I noticed the front door was unlocked. I was sure I had locked it the night before. I told myself I probably forgot. It happens. Still, I locked it again and double-checked. I went into town, bought groceries, and came back before sunset. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed tire tracks in the gravel that weren't there before. They didn't look fresh enough to be mine. The gravel was pressed down, not loose. I stood there for a moment, staring at them, then convinced myself they were old and I just hadn't noticed before. Inside the house, nothing looked disturbed. My bag was where I left it. My food was untouched. Still, I felt more alert than I wanted to be. I checked the windows, all locked, the back door too. I made sure everything was secure before settling in for the night. That night, I slept worse. I kept waking up, listening. The house made normal sounds, the kind any building makes when it cools down. Wood creaking, pipes clicking. Every time, my body reacted like it was something else. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up and noticed the bedroom door was open. I always sleep with it closed. I lay there for a long time, staring at the dark hallway, trying to remember if I had opened it earlier. I eventually got up and closed it again. The next morning, I found muddy footprints near the back door. They weren't heavy, just partial prints, like someone stepped inside and wiped their feet without thinking. My chest felt tight when I saw them. This wasn't something I could explain away easily. I checked the lock. It was locked. I checked the windows again. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. I didn't leave the house that day. I cleaned the footprints even though they weren't mine. I kept the lights on even during the day. Every sound made me stop what I was doing. I noticed things I hadn't before. A loose board on the porch. Scratches on the outside of the back door that looked like they'd been painted over. A window in the laundry room that didn't latch properly. That evening, while taking out the trash, I noticed something else. The shed behind the house, which I hadn't paid much attention to before, had its door slightly open. I was sure it had been closed. I didn't go inside. I didn't even get close. I threw the trash away and went back inside, locking the door behind me. I packed my bag that night. I didn't tell myself I was leaving because I was scared. I told myself I just didn't like the place, that it wasn't worth staying another night. I sat on the couch with my keys in my pocket, listening to the quiet. Nothing happened. No sounds. No movement. Just silence. At around 2 in the morning, I heard a car on the road. It slowed down as it passed the house. The headlights swept across the living room walls through the curtains. Then the car stopped. The engine stayed running. I didn't move. I didn't look outside. After a long time, the engine shut off. I heard a door open, then close. Footsteps on gravel. I stayed perfectly still. My breathing felt loud in my own head. The footsteps didn't come to the door. They moved toward the back of the house. I heard the shed door creak. Then nothing. After what felt like forever, the footsteps returned. Car door closed. The engine started again. The car drove away. I didn't sleep after that. As soon as the sky started to lighten, I carried my bag to the car and left. I didn't check the shed. I didn't walk around the property. I just drove. When I got back home, I reported everything to Airbnb and left a detailed review. A week later, I got a notification saying the listing was no longer available. I never found out why. I still think about that place sometimes. Not because of anything dramatic that happened, but because of how normal it all looked. Quiet house, clean rooms, good pictures. And somewhere nearby, someone who felt comfortable enough to walk around it at night like it was theirs. I booked the Airbnb late at night after scrolling for hours. I was tired, stressed from work, and just wanted somewhere cheap and quiet for a few days. The place was listed as a small house on the edge of a town I had never been to before. The pictures looked normal enough. White walls, simple furniture, clean kitchen, nothing fancy. The description talked about privacy, self-check-in, and a peaceful stay. That was all I wanted. I didn't think too hard about it. I paid, got the address, packed a bag, and left the next morning. The drive there took longer than I expected. The highway slowly turned into smaller roads, then into roads with no markings, just cracked asphalt and weeds growing through the edges. Cell service started cutting in and out. By the time I reached the town, the sun was already low. The town itself felt quiet in a way that didn't feel normal. Not peaceful, just empty. A few buildings stood along the main road, most of them closed or looking worn down. I followed the GPS out of town, down a narrow road lined with trees, until it told me I had arrived. The house sat alone. No neighbors nearby, no other houses in sight. Just trees, dirt, and silence. The place looked like the pictures, but something felt off the moment I parked. The yard wasn't maintained the way the listing suggested. The grass was uneven, patches of dirt everywhere, and old leaves piled up against the sides of the house. The front door had a keypad lock. I entered the code. The door unlocked, and I stepped inside. The air inside smelled stale, like the house had been closed up for too long. The lights worked, but they were dim and yellow. The furniture was basic, almost too basic, like it was chosen only to fill space. The walls were bare. No photos, no decorations, nothing personal at all. It didn't feel like someone owned the place. It felt like a space that existed only to be used. I walked through each room slowly. The kitchen was clean but old. The fridge was empty except for a half-used bottle of water. The bedroom had a made bed with plain sheets, tight and stiff like they had been washed too many times. The bathroom was clean, but the mirror had faint streaks, like it had been wiped in a hurry. Everything looked fine on the surface, but the longer I stood there, the more uncomfortable I felt. I told myself I was just tired. I unpacked, set my bag down, and tried to relax. As night came, the silence became heavier. No cars, no voices, no distant noise at all. Just the sound of wind brushing against the trees and the occasional creak from the house settling. I cooked a simple meal, ate, and sat on the couch scrolling on my phone, but the weak signal made everything slow. I eventually went to bed earlier than usual. Sleep didn't come easily. The mattress felt thin, and the room felt colder than it should have. At some point during the night, I woke up for no clear reason. The house was completely quiet. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. That's when I noticed a sound that hadn't been there before. A slow, steady noise, like movement inside the walls or under the floor. Not loud, just consistent. I stayed still, trying to figure out what it was. It didn't sound like animals. It sounded deliberate, slow, and heavy. The sound eventually stopped. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, daylight made the place feel a little less heavy, but the discomfort didn't leave. I decided to explore the house more closely. In a small hallway closet I hadn't opened before, I found cleaning supplies and a stack of old towels. Behind them, there was a small door I hadn't noticed. It was low to the ground and painted the same color as the wall. When I opened it, I saw a narrow crawl space. It was dark inside, but I could see the dirt floor and wooden supports. The air coming from it smelled damp. I closed the door quickly. I didn't like the idea of that space being there, open and connected to the rest of the house. The rest of the day passed slowly. I went into town, bought food, tried to distract myself. But every time I returned to the house, that same feeling came back. Like the place was watching me, not in a supernatural way, but in a human way. Like I wasn't as alone as I was supposed to be. That night, the sounds came back, louder this time. Not just from one place, but from different parts of the house. The floor creaked in slow patterns. The air vents made soft tapping noises that didn't match the wind outside. I stayed awake, sitting up in bed, listening. My heart was beating hard, and my thoughts kept going to the same place. Someone could be in the crawl space. Someone could be moving around while I was there. I didn't leave immediately. I stayed until morning, barely sleeping, waiting for light. When the sun came up, I packed everything without slowing down. Before leaving, I checked the crawl space door again. This time, I noticed fresh dirt on the floor in front of it. Not a lot, but enough to be noticeable. Small footprints, smeared and uneven, like someone had crawled out recently. That was enough. I left the house and didn't look back. I drove straight out of town and didn't stop until I reached a busy area with people and noise. Later that day, I reported the listing and canceled the rest of my stay. I didn't go into detail. I just said the place was unsafe. Weeks passed, and I tried to forget about it. But the memory stayed with me. The emptiness of the house, the hidden space, the sounds that felt too controlled to be natural. A month later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone. The host account was gone too. No explanation, no trace. I never found out who owned that place or what was really happening there. But I know this for sure. That house wasn't empty when I stayed there. And whoever was using it knew exactly how to stay unseen. I was lucky I left when I did, because staying any longer would have meant finding out something I might not have been able to walk away from. I booked the Airbnb late at night after a long week of work because I wanted to be alone for a few days. The place was listed as a small house on the edge of a quiet town, surrounded by trees, nothing fancy, just cheap and empty. The photos showed plain white walls, old wooden floors, and a porch that looked like it hadn't been painted in years. That was fine with me. I wasn't going there for comfort. I just wanted silence and space. I arrived in the afternoon while the sky was still bright. The road leading to the house was narrow and cracked, with weeds pushing through the edges. There were no other houses close by, just trees, dry grass, and an old mailbox leaning forward like it might fall any day. I parked, stepped out of the car, and stood there for a moment listening. No traffic, no people, just wind moving through leaves and the sound of insects. The house smelled old when I unlocked the door. Not dirty, just unused. The air felt thick, like it had been sitting still for a long time. Inside, everything looked like the pictures. A couch with faded fabric, a small kitchen, one bedroom, one bathroom. Nothing personal anywhere. No photos, no decorations, just furniture and bare walls. It felt more like a storage place than somewhere someone lived. I dropped my bag in the bedroom and walked around checking things out. The windows were clean, but the outside was darkened by trees. So even during the day, the inside felt dim. In the bedroom, the closet door was already open. Inside, it was empty except for a single wire shelf. The bathroom mirror had a small crack in the corner, like it had been hit a long time ago and never replaced. The first night was quiet. Too quiet. I didn't hear cars or voices or even dogs. I tried to sleep early, but the bed felt stiff and unfamiliar. Around midnight, I woke up with the feeling that something had changed. Not a sound, just a feeling. The air felt different, heavier. I lay still and listened. Nothing happened. Eventually, I fell asleep again. The next morning, I noticed something small but strange. My bag had been moved slightly. Not opened, just turned a bit. At first, I blamed myself, thinking maybe I did it without realizing. Still, the feeling stuck with me. I checked the locks on the doors and windows. Everything was locked from the inside. No signs of anyone coming in. Later that day, I found a door I hadn't noticed before. It was in the hallway, painted the same color as the wall. It led to a narrow storage space. Inside, there were cleaning supplies and a ladder. Nothing strange. But the floor inside looked cleaner than the rest of the house, like it was used more often. That night, I slept lightly. I kept waking up for no clear reason. At some point, I heard a faint sound, like something being touched very carefully. It wasn't loud enough to call it a noise, more like movement. I stayed still, staring into the dark, waiting for it to stop. Eventually, it did. The next morning, I checked my phone and saw the battery was lower than it should have been. I was sure I had plugged it in before sleeping. The charger was still in the outlet, but the phone wasn't connected. I stood there holding it, feeling a tightness in my chest that I couldn't explain. I decided to look more closely around the house. Behind the couch, I found a small black device attached to the wall near the floor. It looked like part of the internet setup, but the wire ran into the wall instead of to the router. In the bedroom, I noticed a tiny hole near the smoke detector that hadn't been there before, or at least I hadn't noticed it. The feeling of being watched settled in fully then. Not in a dramatic way, just a slow, heavy realization that something was wrong. I packed my bag right away, but I didn't leave yet. I wanted to understand what was going on, to be sure I wasn't overreacting. I searched online and learned that some people had found hidden cameras in rentals before. That thought made my stomach turn. I checked every corner, every vent, every shelf. In the bathroom, behind the mirror cabinet, I found another small device taped in place. I didn't touch it. I just stood there staring at it, feeling exposed and angry at the same time. I left the house immediately and sat in my car with the doors locked. From there, I looked back at the house and noticed something else for the first time. There was a second structure behind it, partially hidden by trees. A small shed or maybe a converted garage. I hadn't seen it from the listing photos or from the road. I drove away and went to a nearby town where I could use public Wi-Fi. I reported everything to the platform and then to local authorities. I sent photos, details, times. I didn't go back to the house. A few days later, I learned what had really been happening. The owner had been using multiple hidden cameras to watch guests. Not for anything supernatural or mysterious, just control and obsession. The shed behind the house was used as a monitoring room. Power, screens, recordings, everything set up to watch people who thought they were alone. The listing was taken down. The property was searched. Equipment was removed. The owner was arrested and charged. I got my money back, but that part didn't matter much. What stayed with me was the feeling of those nights. The silence, the small changes, the slow understanding that privacy had been taken without me knowing. There was no dramatic chase, no sudden attack, no story you see in movies. Just a quiet violation that happened while I was trying to sleep. I still use rentals sometimes, but I check everything now. I look behind mirrors, inside vents, around outlets. I trust my instincts more than listings or reviews. That experience ended clearly, with real answers and real consequences, but the memory of it never really left. It taught me that the scariest situations don't need anything unreal to be terrifying. They just need to be possible. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap, empty, and far from the city. I needed a place where no one knew me for a few days. The listing showed a small house sitting alone near the edge of a rural town, surrounded by open land and a thin line of trees. The pictures were plain. White walls, old furniture, nothing special. That made it feel safe in a boring way. The description said self-check-in, no neighbors nearby, and limited phone signal. That last part did not bother me at the time. I arrived late in the afternoon. The road leading to the house was narrow and cracked, with weeds growing through the broken asphalt. There were no streetlights, just long stretches of empty land and a few abandoned sheds. The house appeared suddenly around a bend, sitting back from the road. A single-story place with faded paint and a low roof. The driveway was dirt, packed hard by old tires. When I parked, dust hung in the air for a few seconds before settling. The key was in a lockbox like the listing said. The door opened with a stiff pull. Inside, the air smelled old, like dust and something damp. The house was quiet in a way that felt heavy, not peaceful. The floors creaked under my weight. The furniture looked older than in the photos. A couch with sagging cushions. A small table with scratches cut deep into the wood. The walls had marks where frames once hung, lighter squares against darker paint. I walked through every room before unpacking. One bedroom, one bathroom, a small kitchen, a living room facing the front of the house. There was a door in the back that led to a narrow yard. The yard was mostly dirt, with patches of dead grass and a leaning wooden fence. Beyond the fence were trees, close enough that their branches brushed together in the wind. I noticed then that the house felt used, not just lived in, but passed through. Like many people had stayed there for short times and left pieces behind without realizing it. In the bathroom cabinet, I found an old toothbrush with dried toothpaste still on it. In the kitchen drawer, there were mismatched utensils, some bent, some stained. In the bedroom closet, a single worn shoe sat pushed into the corner, covered in dust. I told myself these were normal things for a rental. People forget stuff. Hosts are lazy sometimes. Still, I felt uneasy in a way I could not fully explain. I unpacked anyway. I needed rest. That first night, the house made a lot of noise. Not strange noise, just normal house sounds, but louder than expected. The walls popped as the temperature dropped. The wind pushed against the siding. The trees scraped against each other behind the house. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening. Every sound felt closer than it should have. At some point, I realized the phone signal was worse than I thought. Messages would not send. Pages would not load. I could not even open the Airbnb app properly. That made the silence feel heavier. I went to sleep eventually, but it was shallow and broken. The next morning, I noticed something different. The front doormat was not the way I remembered it. I was sure I had stepped over it without moving it when I came in. Now it sat slightly crooked, with one corner folded. I stood there staring at it longer than made sense, trying to remember if I had kicked it by accident. I convinced myself I had. Later that day, while cleaning up, I found footprints in the dust on the living room floor. They were faint but visible when the light hit them right. I told myself they were mine from the night before, but when I looked closely, the size was wrong. Slightly smaller. The pattern on the sole did not match my shoes. I felt a slow pressure build in my chest. Not panic yet, just awareness. I checked the doors and windows. Everything was locked. No broken glass. No signs of forced entry. I walked the yard, looking for tracks in the dirt. There were many footprints, overlapping and old. It was impossible to tell which were new. That night, I barely slept. I kept the lights on. Around very late, I heard a soft sound from the kitchen. Not a crash or anything loud. Just the sound of something being moved slightly, like a drawer sliding a few inches and stopping. I stayed still, listening. The house went quiet again. I did not get up to check. The next morning, I found one of my bags unzipped. Nothing was missing. That was worse somehow. Someone had touched my things and decided not to take anything. That meant they were not looking to steal. They were just there. I tried to leave that day, but my car would not start. The engine turned over but died immediately. I opened the hood even though I knew nothing about cars. Everything looked normal to me. I tried again and again until the battery weakened. The silence afterward felt complete. I packed my things anyway and moved them closer to the front door. I stayed in the living room all day watching the windows. Late in the afternoon, I noticed movement outside near the trees. Not clear shapes, just the way branches moved when there was no wind. I realized then how close the trees were, how easy it would be to stand there and watch the house. That night, I did not sleep at all. I sat with my back against the wall, listening. Sometime before dawn, I heard slow footsteps on the porch. Heavy, careful steps. They stopped right outside the door. I held my breath until my chest burned. After a long time, the steps moved away. When the sun came up, I pushed the door open and ran to my car. Started immediately, like nothing had ever been wrong. I did not stop to think. I drove straight down the dirt road, onto the cracked asphalt, and kept going until I had full signal again. Later, from a safe place, I checked the listing. It was gone. The host profile no longer existed. I reported everything, but nothing came of it. The house was still there when I drove past weeks later, sitting empty, waiting. I understand now what that place was. It was not haunted. It was worse. It was known. People used it because it was quiet and isolated. Someone else used it too, not to stay but to watch. The house was never meant to feel safe. It was meant to be temporary, forgettable, and easy to disappear from. I was lucky enough to leave before I became just another trace left behind. I booked the Airbnb without thinking too much about it. I just needed a cheap place to stay for a few nights while I handled some personal stuff in a city I didn't know well. The listing looked normal enough. Small house, self-check-in, quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy. The photos showed clean rooms, white walls, basic furniture, and a driveway with a single tree leaning slightly to one side. It looked empty but not abandoned. I've stayed in enough Airbnbs to know that photos can hide a lot, but this one didn't raise any obvious red flags. I arrived late in the evening. The street was calm, almost too calm, with only a few porch lights on and no cars passing by. The house was easy to find. The lockbox worked on the first try, which already felt like a small relief. When I stepped inside, the air felt stale, like the place had been closed up for a while. Not dirty, just unused. I stood there for a moment with my bag on my shoulder, listening. The house was completely silent. The living room was small and plain. A couch that looked barely used, a coffee table with a few light scratches, and a TV mounted slightly crooked on the wall. The smell was a mix of old wood, dust, and cleaning spray. The floor creaked when I walked, not loudly, but enough to notice. I told myself it was just an older house. I dropped my bag and walked around to get familiar with the place. Something I always do. The kitchen was clean but oddly empty. Barely any dishes, no spices, no random leftovers like most Airbnbs have. The fridge was unplugged but clean inside. That stood out to me. Usually hosts keep it running even if it's empty. I plugged it in without thinking much about it. The bedroom was at the end of a narrow hallway. The bed was neatly made. The sheets smelled freshly washed, and the mattress felt firm when I pressed down on it. The window faced the backyard, which was dark and fenced off. I couldn't see much, just the outline of grass and what looked like a shed in the far corner. The bathroom was clean too, but the mirror had faint marks, like someone had wiped it too many times without fully cleaning it. The shower curtain was new, stiff, and still folded at the bottom. Everything felt prepared, but also rushed, like someone wanted it to look right without actually living there. That first night, I slept badly. Not because of noise, but because of how quiet it was. No distant traffic, no neighbors, no dogs barking. Just the occasional creak of the house settling. At one point, I woke up sweating, feeling like I had been holding my breath. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing happened. I eventually fell back asleep, blaming the unfamiliar place. The next morning, I noticed small details that bothered me more in daylight. There were faint scuff marks on the hallway wall at shoulder height, like something heavy had been dragged past it more than once. One of the bedroom outlets was loose, hanging slightly out of the wall. The backyard door was locked with two different locks, one normal and one heavy deadbolt that felt unnecessary for a quiet neighborhood. I spent most of the day out trying not to think about the place. When I came back in the evening, the house felt colder, even though the weather hadn't changed much. The fridge was running now, but it made a loud humming noise that echoed through the kitchen. I stood there listening to it longer than I should have, just to confirm it was the fridge and nothing else. That night, I noticed a smell I hadn't before. It was faint like damp fabric or old boxes. It seemed strongest near the hallway closet. I opened it slowly. Inside were cleaning supplies, a folded ladder, and a few plastic bins stacked neatly. Nothing unusual, but the smell was stronger in there. I closed the door and washed my hands even though I hadn't touched anything. By the third day, I started feeling watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a constant low-level sense. Like the house was paying attention to me. I checked the smoke detectors and vents, half expecting to find hidden cameras. I didn't find any, but the fact that I looked for them made me uneasy. I noticed the Wi-Fi router was mounted high on a shelf, facing the living room, with wires running into the wall instead of the usual setup. It worked fine, but it felt intentionally placed. That evening, while sitting on the couch, I heard a dull thump from the back of the house. Not a bang, more like something heavy being set down. I froze, heart racing, and waited. No follow-up sound. I walked through the house slowly, checking every room, the closet, the bathroom, the backyard door. Everything was exactly as I left it. Locked. Empty. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I decided to leave early. I packed my things quickly, double-checking drawers and outlets like I was making sure I wasn't forgetting something important. Before leaving, I took one last look around. That's when I noticed the scuff marks in the hallway were fresh, darker than before, like they had been rubbed recently. I left the key, locked the door, and drove away without looking back. A few days later, out of curiosity, I checked the listing again. It was gone, completely removed. No reviews, no host profile, nothing. I searched the address on a map and found it listed for sale, described as vacant. I never reported anything because I couldn't point to one clear incident. Nothing dramatic happened. No one appeared. No crime I could prove. But I know how that place felt. Felt staged, watched, and waiting. I still think about how empty it was, how carefully clean it seemed, and how quickly it disappeared. Whatever that house was being used for, I don't think it was meant to be lived in for long, and I don't think I was meant to stay as long as I did. I booked the Airbnb without thinking too much about it. I just needed a place to stay for a few nights while I handled some personal stuff in a town I had never been to before. The listing looked normal. Clean rooms, basic furniture, nothing fancy. It was cheap, which mattered more to me than anything else. The host had a decent rating, not perfect, but not bad either. The pictures showed a small standalone house at the edge of town, close to a wooded area but still connected to a paved road. I figured it would be quiet, which sounded good. I arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was already low, and the light had that dull orange color that made everything look tired. The house sat a little back from the road, with a narrow gravel driveway leading up to it. There was no fence, just tall grass on both sides. The building itself was older than it looked in the pictures. The paint was peeling around the windows, and the front porch sagged slightly in the middle. It wasn't abandoned looking, just worn down, like it had been ignored for a long time. Inside, the air smelled stale, like a place that had been closed up too long. I opened a few windows right away. The furniture was mismatched. A couch that sat too low to the ground, a small table with scratches all over it, and a bed that creaked even when I just leaned on it. Everything was clean enough, but it felt rushed, like someone had done the bare minimum to get it ready. The first night passed without much happening. I unpacked, ate some food I brought with me, and went to sleep early. I remember waking up once in the middle of the night because I heard something outside. It wasn't loud, just a dull sound, like something brushing against the side of the house. I told myself it was probably an animal or the wind. The house was close to the woods, after all. I fell back asleep. The next morning, I noticed muddy footprints near the back door. They weren't clear enough to make out details, but they were definitely human-sized. I stood there for a long time, staring at them, trying to think of a reasonable explanation. Maybe a previous guest had stepped outside before cleaning finished. Maybe the cleaner had gone out back. None of it really made sense, but I didn't want to overthink it. As the day went on, I started noticing small things. One of my bags had been moved slightly from where I left it. A cabinet door in the kitchen was open when I was sure I had closed it. I kept telling myself I was just tired and not paying attention. Being alone in an unfamiliar place messes with your head more than people like to admit. That evening, I locked the doors and windows earlier than I normally would. The house made noises as it cooled down, soft popping sounds in the walls and ceiling. Every now and then I thought I heard footsteps outside, slow and heavy. But whenever I looked out the window, there was nothing there. Just trees and darkness. I barely slept that night. My mind kept running, replaying everything I had noticed since arriving. At some point before dawn, I heard a clear sound from inside the house. It wasn't loud, but it was close. Something shifted, like weight being moved in the living room. I stayed in bed, holding my breath, listening. After a long minute, everything went quiet again. When morning came, I walked through the house carefully. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. But the front door was unlocked. I knew for a fact I had locked it. I checked the lock itself, thinking it might be faulty, but it worked just fine. I spent most of that day away from the house. I didn't feel comfortable there anymore. When I came back in the late afternoon, I parked farther down the driveway and just sat in my car for a few minutes, watching the place. The curtains were slightly different than how I remembered them. One of the front windows was open wider than before. Inside, the smell was stronger, like sweat mixed with damp wood. I noticed something new in the hallway, a faint scuff mark along the wall, right at shoulder height. It looked fresh. That was the moment I stopped trying to explain things away. I packed my bag right then. I didn't rush, but I didn't take my time either. I kept my movements calm, controlled. While I was packing, I found something under the bed that didn't belong to me. It was a flattened cardboard box with food wrappers inside, the kind you get from a gas station. They looked recent. That meant someone had been staying there without my knowledge. I didn't stay another minute longer than I had to. I carried my bag to the car and drove off before the sun fully set. I didn't look back. Later that night, after I checked into a motel, I contacted the platform and reported everything. A few days later, I checked the listing again out of curiosity. It was gone, completely removed. I never got a clear explanation, but I didn't need one. What stayed with me wasn't fear in the dramatic sense. It was the slow realization that someone had been there with me, sharing the same space, watching without being seen. There were no ghosts, no monsters, nothing unreal about it. Just a stranger who knew the house better than I did. I learned something from that experience. Cheap places come with hidden costs, and sometimes the most unsettling situations don't end with chaos or noise. They end quietly, with you leaving before something worse has the chance to happen. I booked the Airbnb without thinking too much about it. I just needed a cheap place to stay for a few nights while I handled some personal stuff in a city I didn't know well. The listing looked normal enough. Small house, self-check-in, quiet neighborhood, nothing fancy. The photos showed clean rooms, white walls, basic furniture, and a driveway with a single tree leaning slightly to one side. It looked empty but not abandoned. I've stayed in enough Airbnbs to know that photos can hide a lot, but this one didn't raise any obvious red flags. I arrived late in the evening. The street was calm, almost too calm, with only a few porch lights on and no cars passing by. The house was easy to find. The lockbox worked on the first try, which already felt like a small relief. When I stepped inside, the air felt stale, like the place had been closed up for a while. Not dirty, just unused. I stood there for a moment with my bag on my shoulder, listening. The house was completely silent. The living room was small and plain. A couch that looked barely used, a coffee table with a few light scratches, and a TV mounted slightly crooked on the wall. The smell was a mix of old wood, dust, and cleaning spray. The floor creaked when I walked, not loudly, but enough to notice. I told myself it was just an older house. I dropped my bag and walked around to get familiar with the place. Something I always do. The kitchen was clean but oddly empty. Barely any dishes, no spices, no random leftovers like most Airbnbs have. The fridge was unplugged but clean inside. That stood out to me. Usually hosts keep it running even if it's empty. I plugged it in without thinking much about it. The bedroom was at the end of a narrow hallway. The bed was neatly made. The sheets smelled freshly washed, and the mattress felt firm when I pressed down on it. The window faced the backyard, which was dark and fenced off. I couldn't see much, just the outline of grass and what looked like a shed in the far corner. The bathroom was clean too, but the mirror had faint marks, like someone had wiped it too many times without fully cleaning it. The shower curtain was new, stiff, and still folded at the bottom. Everything felt prepared, but also rushed, like someone wanted it to look right without actually living there. That first night, I slept badly. Not because of noise, but because of how quiet it was. No distant traffic, no neighbors, no dogs barking. Just the occasional creak of the house settling. At one point, I woke up sweating, feeling like I had been holding my breath. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening. Nothing happened. I eventually fell back asleep, blaming the unfamiliar place. The next morning, I noticed small details that bothered me more in daylight. There were faint scuff marks on the hallway wall at shoulder height, like something heavy had been dragged past it more than once. One of the bedroom outlets was loose, hanging slightly out of the wall. The backyard door was locked with two different locks, one normal and one heavy deadbolt that felt unnecessary for a quiet neighborhood. I spent most of the day out trying not to think about the place. When I came back in the evening, the house felt colder, even though the weather hadn't changed much. The fridge was running now, but it made a loud humming noise that echoed through the kitchen. I stood there listening to it longer than I should have, just to confirm it was the fridge and nothing else. That night, I noticed a smell I hadn't before. It was faint like damp fabric or old boxes. It seemed strongest near the hallway closet. I opened it slowly. Inside were cleaning supplies, a folded ladder, and a few plastic bins stacked neatly. Nothing unusual, but the smell was stronger in there. I closed the door and washed my hands even though I hadn't touched anything. By the third day, I started feeling watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a constant low-level sense. Like the house was paying attention to me. I checked the smoke detectors and vents, half expecting to find hidden cameras. I didn't find any, but the fact that I looked for them made me uneasy. I noticed the Wi-Fi router was mounted high on a shelf, facing the living room, with wires running into the wall instead of the usual setup. It worked fine, but it felt intentionally placed. That evening, while sitting on the couch, I heard a dull thump from the back of the house. Not a bang, more like something heavy being set down. I froze, heart racing, and waited. No follow-up sound. I walked through the house slowly, checking every room, the closet, the bathroom, the backyard door. Everything was exactly as I left it. Locked, empty. I barely slept that night. In the morning, I decided to leave early. I packed my things quickly, double-checking drawers and outlets like I was making sure I wasn't forgetting something important. Before leaving, I took one last look around. That's when I noticed the scuff marks in the hallway were fresh, darker than before, like they had been rubbed recently. I left the key, locked the door, and drove away without looking back. A few days later, out of curiosity, I checked the listing again. It was gone, completely removed. No reviews, no host profile, nothing. I searched the address on a map and found it listed for sale, described as vacant. I never reported anything because I couldn't point to one clear incident. Nothing dramatic happened. No one appeared. No crime I could prove. But I know how that place felt. Felt staged, watched, and waiting. I still think about how empty it was, how carefully clean it seemed, and how quickly it disappeared. Whatever that house was being used for, I don't think it was meant to be lived in for long, and I don't think I was meant to stay as long as I did. I booked the Airbnb on a random night when I needed to get away from everything. Work had been heavy, my sleep was bad, and I wanted somewhere quiet where nobody knew me. The place was listed as a small house on the edge of a town I had never been to before. The photos looked plain but clean. White walls, old wooden floors, a narrow driveway, and trees all around the property. Nothing fancy. That was exactly what I wanted. I arrived late in the afternoon. The sun was already low, and the light had that dull orange look it gets before evening. The road to the house was narrow and cracked, with weeds growing through the sides. There were no other houses close by. The town itself felt tired, like people passed through it but never stayed long. I parked in front of the house and sat in the car for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled down. The house looked older in real life than in the photos. The paint was peeling in places, and the front steps leaned slightly to one side. Leaves were piled up along the edges of the porch, like nobody had swept in a while. I unlocked the door using the keypad code and stepped inside. The air smelled stale, like dust and old wood that had been shut up for too long. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. The house had a living room with a couch that looked worn down in the middle, a small kitchen with outdated appliances, and a narrow hallway leading to the bedroom and bathroom. The floors creaked when I walked, even when I tried to step lightly. I dropped my bag near the couch and walked through each room slowly, checking corners and closets out of habit. Nothing stood out at first. Everything was normal, just old. The windows were thick and slightly cloudy, making it hard to see clearly outside. The backyard was fenced in, but the fence was broken in a few places, leaning inward. Beyond it was a stretch of trees and tall grass. No lights, no nearby buildings, just darkness waiting for night. As the evening went on, small details started to bother me. I noticed scuff marks on the floor near the bedroom door, like something heavy had been dragged back and forth many times. In the bathroom, the mirror had faint scratches on the surface, thin lines that caught the light at certain angles. The bedroom smelled stronger than the rest of the house, like sweat mixed with something metallic. I opened a window to let fresh air in, but it barely helped. I tried to relax. I cooked a simple meal, ate at the small table, and watched something on my phone. Still, I kept feeling like the house had been used too much for short stays. Like people passed through it quickly and left behind pieces of themselves. The couch cushions were uneven, and one of the lamps had a dent in the metal shade, as if it had been knocked over more than once. When it got dark, the house changed. The shadows felt heavier. The trees outside blocked most of the moonlight, and the inside lights created deep pockets of darkness in corners and doorways. Every sound felt louder. The fridge hum, the floor settling, the wind brushing against the walls. Later that night, while lying in bed, I noticed something that made my chest tighten. There were faint marks on the wall next to the bed. At first I thought they were stains or old paint damage. When I got closer, I saw they were handprints. Not clear ones, but smudged shapes, like someone had pressed their hands against the wall many times. They were at different heights, some higher, some lower, overlapping each other. I admitted to myself that I was uncomfortable, but I stayed. I told myself it was just an old rental with poor maintenance. People are messy. People leave marks. That explanation worked until I noticed the bedroom door. Every time I closed it, it didn't sit right in the frame. It stayed slightly open, just enough to let a thin line of hallway light through. I tried adjusting it, pushing harder, even placing something against it. It always shifted back after a while, like the house itself didn't want that door fully closed. Sleep came in short pieces. I kept waking up for no clear reason, heart racing, ears remembering sounds that weren't there anymore. Early in the morning, I finally got up and walked through the house again. The living room rug had been moved slightly, bunched near one corner. I knew how I had left it the night before. The kitchen chairs were no longer pushed in evenly. That was when I started looking more closely. Behind the couch, there were deep scratches in the floor, long and uneven. In a hallway closet I hadn't opened before, I found cleaning supplies and a stack of old towels stained darker than they should have been. The smell in that closet was strong and sour, like something had soaked into the wood over time and never came out. I checked the listing on my phone again, reading reviews I had skimmed before. Most were short and vague. Comments about location, price, and quiet. A few mentioned that the place felt strange at night, but none went into detail. One review simply said it was not what they expected and left it at that. By midday, I decided I wasn't staying another night. The house felt wrong in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. Not in a supernatural way, but in a human way. Like too much had happened there, and the walls remembered it even if they didn't show it clearly. Before leaving, I did one last walkthrough. In the bedroom, behind the headboard, I found more marks on the wall, deeper ones this time, where the paint was worn down to bare plaster. In the bathroom, the drain had a rust-colored ring around it that didn't look old. It looked recent. I packed quickly, not caring about being neat. As I stepped outside, the air felt lighter, like I could finally breathe fully again. I locked the door, walked to my car, and drove away without looking back. The road felt longer than it had when I arrived, but I didn't slow down. Later that day, I canceled the rest of my stay and reported the place with detailed notes and photos. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't make wild claims. I simply described what I saw and how it made me feel. A few days later, the listing disappeared. I still think about that house sometimes. Not because of fear, but because of the quiet truth it carried. It wasn't haunted. It wasn't cursed. It was just a place where something bad had happened more than once, and nobody had bothered to fully clean it up. The ending was clear for me the moment I drove away. I had trusted my instincts, left before something worse could happen, and learned that sometimes the most unsettling places are the ones that don't try to scare you at all. I booked the Airbnb late at night after a long week of work because I wanted to be alone for a few days. The place looked normal in the photos. It was a small house on the edge of a quiet town, not far from the highway, surrounded by trees and empty land. The description said it was peaceful, clean, and perfect for people who needed rest. That sounded exactly like what I wanted. I did not overthink it. I packed a small bag, filled my car with gas, and drove there the next afternoon. The drive itself felt longer than it should have. Once I left the main road, the streets became narrow and poorly maintained. Some houses looked abandoned, with broken fences and yards full of weeds. Others looked lived in but strangely still, like nobody was home even though it was the middle of the day. My phone signal dropped in and out, and the GPS kept recalculating. When I finally reached the address, I had to slow down because the road turned into gravel. The house sat alone at the end of a short driveway. Tall trees surrounded it on 3 sides, and the 4th side faced an empty field that stretched far back. The house itself was older than it looked in the photos. The paint was faded, and the porch boards creaked when I stepped on them. Still, nothing about it screamed danger. It just felt tired, like a place that had been standing there too long without much care. Inside, the air smelled stale, like it had been closed up for weeks. I opened a few windows to let some fresh air in. The furniture was simple and mismatched. A couch that sagged in the middle, a wooden table with scratches, and shelves that were mostly empty. The kitchen was clean but old, with appliances that hummed loudly when turned on. I checked the bathroom and bedroom, and everything seemed fine. The bed sheets were clean, and the locks on the doors worked. By the time evening came, the silence started to feel heavy. There were no nearby cars, no voices, not even the sound of wind moving through the trees. I cooked a simple meal and ate alone at the table. When it got dark, the area outside the windows turned completely black. There were no streetlights, no nearby houses with lights on, nothing. It felt like the house was floating in darkness. That night, I noticed small things that made me uneasy. The floorboards creaked in places where I had not walked. The house made settling noises, which I tried to tell myself were normal. Still, every sound felt louder because there was nothing else to cover it. I barely slept and woke up several times, staring at the ceiling and listening. The next morning, I went outside to clear my head. That was when I noticed footprints near my car. They were not mine. They were fresh, pressed into the gravel, and led toward the side of the house before disappearing into the grass. I told myself they could belong to the owner or someone passing by, but the place was so isolated that it did not make much sense. Inside the house, I noticed that a cabinet door in the kitchen was open. I was sure I had closed it the night before. I went through the house slowly, checking every room. Nothing was missing. Nothing looked broken. Still, the feeling that I was not fully alone settled in my chest and stayed there. As the day went on, I found more signs that did not sit right with me. The back door was unlocked even though I remembered locking it. One of the windows I had closed was open again, just slightly. The worst part was the bedroom closet. The door was open, and the floor inside had marks, like someone had been standing there for a long time, shifting their weight. I started to feel watched, not in a dramatic way, but in a quiet, constant way that made my shoulders tense and my stomach tight. Every time I moved, I felt like something was just out of sight. I tried to distract myself by reading and using my phone, but the signal was weak and kept dropping. When evening came again, I turned on every light in the house. The darkness outside pressed against the windows, thick and unmoving. I checked all the locks twice. I placed a chair under the front door handle, even though I felt silly doing it. Sleep did not come easily. Sometime during the night, I woke up with the feeling that something was wrong. The house was too quiet, even quieter than before. I lay still and listened. Then I heard movement. Not footsteps, not loud, but slow and careful sounds, like someone trying not to be heard. The sound came from the living room area. My body felt frozen. I did not move. I barely breathed. The sounds continued, soft shuffling and the faint creak of wood. Whoever it was knew the house well enough to move through it in the dark. I realized then that this was not an animal. It was too controlled, too deliberate. After what felt like a long time, the sound stopped. I waited longer, afraid that any movement on my part would give me away. Eventually, I heard the back door open and close, slow and quiet. The house settled again into silence. When morning finally came, I did not hesitate. I packed my things as fast as I could. My hands shook as I checked the rooms one last time. Nothing was obviously disturbed, but the feeling of being violated stayed with me. Outside, I saw fresh footprints again, clearer this time. They led from the tree line to the back door. I got into my car and drove away without looking back. Once I reached a place with signal, I reported the stay and left immediately. Later, I found out that the area had a history of people breaking into short-term rentals, using them as temporary shelter, hiding inside while guests stayed there. What stayed with me was not just the fear of that night, but the quiet nature of it. No dramatic moment, no clear face, just the slow realization that someone had been close enough to hear me breathe while I slept. I never booked an isolated Airbnb again. The peace I was looking for came at a cost I was lucky to escape. I booked the Airbnb late at night without thinking too much about it. I was driving for hours and needed somewhere to sleep, and this place was cheap, empty, and close to the highway. The photos showed a small house sitting alone at the edge of a town that looked half abandoned. One floor, old with siding, gravel driveway, no neighbors close by. The description said quiet, private, perfect for people who wanted space. That sounded fine to me. I was tired, sore, and just wanted a bed and a shower. I arrived just after midnight. The road leading to the house was narrow and poorly lit, with tall weeds growing close to the edges. My headlights caught broken fences and old mailboxes leaning at odd angles. The house sat farther back than I expected, surrounded by trees that blocked most of the moonlight. When I turned off the engine, the silence felt heavy, like the sound had been cut off completely. No cars, no wind, no insects, just stillness. The outside of the house looked older in person. The paint was peeling in places, and the porch steps creaked under my weight. The lockbox worked, and the key turned smoothly. Inside, the air smelled stale, like the place had been closed up for a long time. I flipped on the lights one by one. The living room was small and crowded with furniture that didn't match. The couch sagged in the middle. The coffee table had deep scratches. The walls had marks where pictures used to hang. I walked through slowly, checking each room out of habit. The kitchen was clean but old, with a humming fridge and yellowed cabinets. The bedroom had a made bed with plain sheets and a thin blanket folded at the foot. The bathroom was narrow, with a mirror that had black spots along the edges. Everything looked normal, just worn, like the house had seen too many years and not enough care. I locked the door, dropped my bag, and took a shower. The water pressure was weak, and the pipes made knocking sounds in the walls. I tried not to think about how alone the house was. Afterward, I lay down on the bed fully dressed, too tired to change. The mattress dipped under my weight, and the frame creaked every time I moved. I didn't fall asleep right away. The house made noises that didn't follow a pattern. Soft thumps, faint scraping sounds, something like footsteps but slower and heavier. I told myself it was the wood settling or animals outside. Old houses always made noise. Still, I kept the light on. At some point, I drifted off. I woke up later to a different feeling, the sense that something was wrong without knowing exactly what. The room felt colder. The light was still on, but the brightness seemed duller. I noticed the bedroom door was open. I was sure I had closed it before lying down. I sat up and listened. The house was quiet again, but not in the same way as before. It felt tense, like the air was holding its breath. I got out of bed and walked to the doorway. From there, I could see into the living room. Nothing looked out of place at first. Then I noticed the front door. It was unlocked. I stood still for a long time, staring at it. I was certain I had locked it. I remembered the sound of the lock turning. I walked closer and checked it. The door opened easily. A wave of cold air came in from outside, carrying the smell of dirt and wet leaves. I closed and locked it again, harder this time, and leaned my weight against it for a second. My heart was beating faster than it should have been. I told myself I must have made a mistake earlier. I was tired. People forgot things when they were exhausted. I turned back toward the bedroom and stopped. The couch cushions were no longer flat. One of them was pressed down like someone had been sitting there recently. I hadn't touched the couch at all since arriving. I didn't want to panic, but my body reacted before my mind did. My hands felt shaky. My mouth was dry. I walked through the house again, checking every corner, every room, every closet. Nothing was there. No broken windows. No signs of forced entry. Just the same old house. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the edge of the bed until morning, listening. Around sunrise, I heard something outside. Slow footsteps on gravel. They circled the house once, then stopped near the front door. I stayed still, barely breathing. After a while, the steps moved away. I waited until full daylight before leaving the bedroom. Outside, I saw footprints in the gravel. Large, deep impressions like someone heavy had walked around the house more than once. They led to the front door and then disappeared into the trees. I packed my things quickly. As I was about to leave, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the inside of the front door, scratched into the wood at eye level, were faint lines forming words. They were shallow, like someone had used a key or a nail. The words were hard to read, but clear enough. "Don't lock it." I stood there for a long time, staring at those scratches. The reason behind them felt obvious without needing an explanation. Whoever had been there before me had learned something the hard way. I left the key on the table, walked out, and didn't look back. I reported the place when I had cell service again, describing everything in detail. The listing was gone a few days later. I never heard anything back. What stayed with me wasn't fear of ghosts or anything unreal. It was the thought that someone knew that house well enough to move through it silently, to unlock doors without leaving damage, and to come back again and again. The house wasn't empty. It was being used. I just wasn't meant to know by who. I don't book places like that anymore. I stay where there are lights, people, and noise, because what happened that night felt planned, not random. And that makes it harder to forget. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to where I needed to be for a short work break. The photos showed a small house sitting alone on the edge of a quiet town. Nothing fancy, just white walls, a narrow driveway, and a backyard that looked a little overgrown. Felt normal, which was what I wanted. I was tired and didn't want surprises. I wanted a place to sleep, shower, and stay out of the way for a few days. I arrived in the late afternoon. The sun was already low, turning everything orange and dull. The house looked older in real life than it did in the photos. The paint was chipped around the door frame, and the steps creaked when I walked up them. I unlocked the door with the code I was given and stepped inside. The air smelled like dust and cleaning spray mixed together, the kind of smell that tells you someone cleaned fast and left. The living room was small and tight. A couch that sagged in the middle sat against one wall, and a TV was mounted too high on the opposite side. There were no personal items anywhere, no photos, no books, nothing that made it feel lived in. Just furniture placed carefully like a setup. The floor was clean, but the boards were scratched and uneven. Every step made a quiet sound. I dropped my bag by the couch and walked through the rest of the place. The kitchen was narrow, with old cabinets that didn't line up properly. Some of the handles were loose. The fridge was empty except for a bottle of water and a half-used pack of butter. The bedroom was at the back of the house. The bed was made tightly, too tightly, like no one had touched it since the last guest. The sheets smelled clean but flat, like they had been sitting in a closet for a long time. The bathroom was the last room. The light flickered when I turned it on. The mirror had small black spots around the edges where the glass was starting to break down. The shower curtain was thin and cheap. Nothing was wrong exactly, but nothing felt comfortable either. That first night, I tried to relax. I ordered food, ate on the couch, and watched TV. The house made noise as the temperature dropped outside. Pipes clicked, wood popped. I told myself it was normal because it was. Old houses always make sounds. Still, I kept noticing how quiet it was otherwise. No traffic, no neighbors, no dogs, just empty silence between the noises. When I went to bed, I checked the locks twice. I lay there staring at the ceiling, noticing a faint stain above the bed that looked like it had been painted over too many times. I eventually fell asleep, but it was light and broken. The next morning, I woke up early. Sunlight came through the thin curtains, showing dust in the air. I felt stiff and tired, like I hadn't rested at all. When I went to the kitchen, I noticed something small that I was sure hadn't been there before. One of the cabinet doors under the sink was open. I remembered checking the kitchen the night before, and I remembered everything being closed. I told myself I might be wrong. I closed it and made coffee. Over the day, I left the house for work and came back in the evening. Everything looked the same when I returned, but the feeling was different. The air felt heavier, like the place had been shut up too long. I opened a window in the living room even though it was cold outside. The wind moved the curtains slightly, and the house finally felt like it was breathing. That night, I heard a sound after midnight. It wasn't loud, just a slow, steady creak coming from somewhere inside the house. Not the kind of sound that repeats quickly, but one that happens, stops, and then happens again after a long pause. I lay still and listened. It didn't sound like footsteps, but it also didn't sound like pipes or wood. It sounded like weight shifting. I didn't get out of bed. I didn't turn on the light. I stayed still until the sound stopped. When it did, the silence felt worse than the noise. I eventually fell asleep again, but I dreamed about being awake in that room, staring at the door. The next day, I noticed more small things. The bathroom light was on when I knew I had turned it off. The trash bin in the kitchen had been moved slightly, just enough that it wasn't sitting straight anymore. None of it was big enough to prove anything. Each thing could be explained away if I tried hard enough. That was the worst part. My brain kept filling in the gaps. That evening, I checked the listing again. I read the reviews carefully. Most of them were short and neutral. Clean place, easy check-in, quiet area. One review stood out because it was longer than the rest. It mentioned feeling uneasy but didn't explain why. It said the stay was fine overall but that the guest wouldn't return. That stuck with me. That night, I barely slept. Every small sound pulled me awake. I kept thinking about how easy it would be for someone to enter the house without me knowing. I thought about the locks, the windows, the quiet street. I thought about how empty the house felt, like it was meant to be used and forgotten. In the morning, I found the back door unlocked. I knew for sure I had locked it the night before. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I didn't panic. I didn't run. I just felt tired, like my body had made a decision before my mind caught up. I packed my bag slowly. I checked every room one last time. Nothing was out of place now. The house looked perfect again, like it was resetting itself. I locked the door behind me and stood on the porch for a moment. The air outside felt lighter, cleaner. I took a deep breath without meaning to. I left early and canceled the rest of the stay. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I didn't write a dramatic review. I just said the place wasn't a good fit for me. That felt honest enough. Weeks later, I still think about that house sometimes. Not because of fear, but because of how close it felt to something real and uncomfortable. There was no single moment I could point to and say that was it. Just a slow build of small signs that added up to a clear message. I learned that feeling safe isn't about locks or clean sheets or good photos online. It's about how your body reacts when you're alone somewhere. That place never did anything obvious, but it never let me relax either. Leaving was the right ending, and I don't regret it. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and because it was far enough from the city that it felt like a reset. I had been burned out for months, working late, sleeping badly, eating whatever was closest. The listing showed a small house sitting alone at the edge of a quiet town. No neighbors close by, just trees, a gravel driveway, and a wide sky. The photos were plain. White walls, old wooden floors, basic furniture, nothing fancy. That actually made it feel more real to me, like someone actually lived there once. I packed a bag, filled my car with gas, and drove out there on a Friday afternoon. The drive got quieter the farther I went. Gas stations turned into long stretches of road with nothing on either side. Cell service dropped to 1 bar and then disappeared. By the time I turned onto the gravel road mentioned in the listing, the sun was already low. The house appeared slowly through the trees. It was smaller than I expected. 1 floor, maybe 2 bedrooms, a small porch, and a metal roof with rust marks near the edges. It looked old but solid, like it had survived a lot of seasons. I unlocked the door using the code I was given. Inside, the air smelled like dust and old wood. Not bad, just unused. The floor creaked under my shoes. The living room had a couch that sagged in the middle, a small table, and a bookshelf with random old books that didn't seem to match each other. The kitchen was clean but basic. Scratches on the counter. A fridge that hummed louder than normal. Everything felt slightly off in the way empty places often do, but still normal enough. I walked through the rooms, checking windows and doors out of habit. Both bedrooms were plain. One had a bed that looked newer than the rest of the house, like it had been replaced recently. The other had an older bed frame with marks on the wood, like someone had dragged things against it over time. The bathroom mirror had faint spots that didn't come off when I wiped it. I told myself it was just age. As night came, the silence became heavier. No traffic noise, no voices, just wind moving through trees and the occasional sound of something brushing against the side of the house. I made a simple meal, ate it slowly, and tried to relax. I turned on the TV, but the signal was weak and kept cutting out. I shut it off and sat there listening to the house. Every old building makes noise, but this one seemed to shift and settle more than most. Pipes clicked. The roof popped as it cooled. Later, when I went to bed, I noticed the bedroom door didn't stay fully open or fully closed. It drifted, stopping halfway, like the frame wasn't straight. I pushed it shut and lay down. The mattress was firm, almost too firm. I stared at the ceiling, counting the faint cracks in the paint until my eyes grew heavy. I woke up sometime in the night feeling alert for no clear reason. The room was dark, but not completely. Moonlight leaked through the thin curtains. The door was open again. I was sure I had closed it. I listened for a long time. Nothing obvious. Just the same quiet sounds. I got up and closed it again, checking the handle to make sure it latched. I went back to bed and eventually fell asleep. In the morning, sunlight made the place look more normal, almost friendly. I made coffee and sat at the small table, watching dust float in the air. That was when I noticed the notebook on the bookshelf. I hadn't seen it before. It was thinner than the books around it and didn't have a title on the cover. The pages inside were filled with writing, but not in any clear order. Dates jumped around. Some pages were neat, others rushed. It looked like someone had used it to track things, but I couldn't tell what. Grocery lists mixed with notes about repairs. Mentions of strange sounds, broken locks, and feeling watched, written casually, like daily observations. I told myself it was probably just an old owner journaling stress or boredom. Still, it stuck with me. I put the notebook back and went outside to clear my head. The property was bigger than I thought. Behind the house was a narrow path leading into the trees. I followed it for a bit and found old scrap metal and broken furniture dumped in a shallow ditch. It looked like it had been there for years. When I came back inside, the front door was unlocked. I clearly remembered locking it. I stood there for a long time, checking every room again. Nothing was disturbed. My bag was where I left it. No signs of anyone else. The logical part of my brain tried to explain it away. Maybe I hadn't locked it properly. Maybe the door shifted. That night, I stayed up later. I kept the lights on. I didn't open the notebook again. Around midnight, I heard a steady sound coming from the kitchen. The fridge door was slightly open, the light glowing. I closed it, feeling a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. I checked the front door. Locked. The back door. Locked. Windows. All closed. I slept poorly, waking up often. Each time, I felt like the house was closer somehow, like the walls were leaning in. In the morning, I decided to leave early. The rest wasn't worth it. As I packed, I noticed faint muddy marks near the back door, shaped like partial footprints, smudged and uneven. They looked old, not fresh, but they hadn't been there before. I loaded my car quickly. Before driving off, I looked back at the house. From the outside, it looked completely normal. Quiet. Empty. Like nothing had happened at all. When I got home, I checked the Airbnb listing. It was gone. No history. No messages. Nothing. I tried searching the address separately and found a short news article from years ago about a property being abandoned after repeated break-ins and reports of people entering the house without permission, even after locks were changed. No one was ever caught. Eventually, the place was sold. That was the ending for me. Nothing dramatic. No clear moment where everything made sense. Just the understanding that the house had a history of being accessed, used, and entered by people who were never seen. I didn't imagine things. I didn't experience anything impossible. I stayed in a place that wasn't as empty as it claimed to be. I learned that isolation doesn't always mean peace, and cheap stays come with costs you don't see in the listing. I never booked a place that far from people again. I booked the Airbnb without thinking much about it. I just needed a place to stay for a few nights, somewhere cheap and quiet, somewhere I could sleep and reset my head. The pictures showed a small house on the edge of a town I had never been to before. It looked normal. White walls, a narrow driveway, a fenced backyard, and a porch with 2 plastic chairs. Nothing about it stood out. That was exactly why I chose it. I arrived late in the evening. The sky was already dark, and the streetlights were spaced far apart. The neighborhood felt half empty, like people lived there but stayed indoors most of the time. I parked my car in the driveway and sat there for a minute, engine off, listening to the ticking sound as it cooled. The air smelled like damp dirt and old leaves. Somewhere far away, a dog barked once and then stopped. The front door unlocked easily with the code I was given. Inside, the house smelled like cleaning spray mixed with something older, like closed rooms and dust that never fully leaves. The lights worked, and everything looked exactly like the photos. A small living room, a couch with stiff cushions, a coffee table with scratches, and a TV mounted a little too high on the wall. The kitchen was narrow, with mismatched plates and a fridge that hummed loudly when it kicked on. The bedroom had a low bed, white sheets, and a thin blanket folded neatly at the end. I walked through the house slowly, checking each room out of habit. The bathroom was clean but worn. The fan rattled when I turned it on. The bedroom window faced the backyard, which was fenced in with old wooden panels leaning slightly inward. Beyond the fence was nothing but darkness and the outline of trees. I closed the curtains and told myself it was fine. That first night was mostly quiet. I slept lightly, waking up a few times to the sound of the fridge or the house settling. Every place makes noise at night, especially older houses. I didn't think much of it. In the morning, sunlight came through the thin curtains, and the place looked less strange. Just another rental. Just another house. The second day passed without anything happening. I left in the morning, came back in the evening, cooked a simple meal, and watched TV until I got tired. It was when I went to bed that night that things started to feel off. Not in a dramatic way, but in a slow, uncomfortable way that crept in without warning. I woke up in the middle of the night feeling like I had slept for hours, but my phone said it was only a little after 2 a.m. The room felt colder than before. I could hear a low sound, not loud, just steady. At first, I thought it was the wind, but it didn't rise or fall. It stayed the same. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, trying to place it. The sound was coming from somewhere inside the house. I got out of bed and walked into the hallway. The floorboards felt colder under my feet. The sound became clearer as I moved toward the living room. It wasn't mechanical. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic, like something being moved over and over again. I stopped in the middle of the living room and listened. The sound was coming from the locked storage room near the kitchen. I remembered noticing that door earlier. The listing said it was locked and not for guest use. I hadn't thought about it since. The sound stopped as suddenly as it started. The silence afterward felt heavy, like the house was holding its breath. I stood there for a long time, waiting for it to start again. Didn't. Eventually, I went back to bed, telling myself it was pipes or the heater or something old houses do at night. I slept poorly after that. The next day, I noticed small things. The couch cushions were slightly out of place when I came back, even though I knew how I left them. The bathroom mirror had faint streaks on it that hadn't been there before. The backyard gate, which I remembered being closed, was open a few inches. None of these things were proof of anything, but together they made my stomach feel tight. That night, I stayed awake longer than usual. I left the lights on in the living room and sat on the couch, scrolling on my phone. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt watched, not in a supernatural way, but in a human way. Like someone knowing where you are without being in the same room. Sometime after midnight, the sound came back. This time, it was closer. I didn't move. I sat still, listening. It was slow now, deliberate. I realized it sounded like something being dragged across the floor, stopping, then dragged again. It came from the hallway. My heart started pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stood up slowly and turned toward the hallway. The light from the living room stretched into it, but the far end stayed dark. The sound stopped again right as I faced it. I didn't check the storage room. I didn't check anything. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and my jacket. I walked to the front door and unlocked it as quietly as I could. Even though no one was speaking, no one was moving. I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. I didn't sleep there again. I drove to a gas station and sat in my car until morning. When the sun came up, I went back only to grab the rest of my things. In daylight, the house looked harmless again, almost boring. I packed quickly, avoiding the hallway as much as I could. Before leaving, I noticed something on the inside of the storage room door. Scratches near the handle, thin and uneven, like someone had tried to pry it open from the inside at some point. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old enough to be ignored either. I left the keys on the table and walked out for the last time. Later that day, I looked up the property online again, out of curiosity more than anything. I found an old local news article about a man who had been arrested years ago for hiding in rental homes and staying inside them while guests came and went. He used locked storage rooms and crawl spaces. The addresses weren't listed, but the area was the same. I don't know if it was the same house. I don't know if someone was still doing it. What I do know is that I didn't imagine the sounds, and I didn't misunderstand that feeling. That house wasn't empty when I stayed there, and leaving when I did was the only reason nothing worse happened. I booked the Airbnb because it was cheap and close to the edge of town, and I needed a place for a few nights where I could be alone and get some work done. The pictures showed a small house that looked old but clean. It sat by itself at the end of a dirt road, with trees on 3 sides and a wide empty field on the 4th. The description said it was quiet and private. That was enough for me. I arrived just before sunset. The road leading to the place was narrow and uneven, and my car kicked up dust that hung in the air behind me. There were no other houses nearby, no streetlights, and no sounds except the engine and the wind moving through dry grass. The house looked smaller in real life than it did in the photos. The paint was faded, and the porch steps leaned slightly to one side. Nothing looked broken, just worn down by time. Inside, the air felt stale, like the house had been closed up for too long. I opened a few windows to let fresh air in. The furniture was basic and old-fashioned. A couch with sagging cushions, a wooden table with scratches, and a bed that creaked even when I barely touched it. I noticed the smell right away. It was not strong, but it was there, like damp wood mixed with dust. I told myself it was just an old building. As it got darker, the quiet became heavier. There were no normal city sounds. No cars, no distant voices, no music. Just wind, insects, and the occasional sound of something moving in the trees. I cooked a simple meal and ate it standing by the counter, then sat on the couch and scrolled on my phone. The signal was weak, going in and out. That made the place feel even more cut off. That night, I slept badly. The bed felt uncomfortable, and every small sound seemed louder than it should have been. The house made noises as it cooled down, soft pops and creaks in the walls. At some point, I woke up and noticed the smell again, stronger this time. It reminded me of something stored too long in a damp basement. I lay there until morning, staring at the ceiling. The next day, I explored the house more closely. I opened cabinets, checked drawers, and looked into every room. Everything seemed normal, but there were small things that felt off. The bathroom mirror had marks on it that looked like they had been wiped around many times, leaving cloudy streaks. The back door had deep scratches near the handle, as if something hard had scraped against it over and over. The windows were locked, but the locks felt loose, like they had been forced before. Outside, I walked around the property. The field behind the house was empty and flat, with dry grass and patches of dirt. Near the tree line, I noticed uneven ground, like the soil had been disturbed and settled again. I told myself it was probably animals. Still, I did not walk too close. That afternoon, I tried to focus on my work, but I kept getting distracted by the feeling that the house was not fully empty. I checked every room again, including the small storage space under the stairs. It was packed with old boxes and broken items, all covered in dust. Nothing moved. Nothing seemed alive. Still, the feeling stayed. That night, things got worse. The smell returned, heavier and harder to ignore. It was not just damp wood anymore. It had a sour, rotten edge to it. I opened windows again, but the air outside did not help much. As I lay in bed, I noticed a faint vibration, like something mechanical running far away. It came and went, not steady enough to understand. Sometime after midnight, I woke up again. The house was completely dark. The power was out. My phone showed no signal and a low battery. In the silence, I could hear a slow, dull sound coming from beneath the floor. It was not loud, but it was steady, like something being moved or dragged very slowly. I stayed in bed, holding my breath, listening. The sound stopped after a while, and the silence felt even worse than the noise. In the morning, I packed my bag without thinking too much about it. I planned to leave early, but before I did, I noticed something near the back of the house. One of the boards along the foundation looked newer than the others. The soil beneath it was dark and packed down differently. The smell was strongest there. I did not touch anything. I did not investigate further. I loaded my car and left the property, driving away faster than I had arrived. As soon as I got back into an area with service, I canceled the rest of my stay. Later, I searched public records online. It took time, but I found mentions of the property under an older address. Years ago, it had been owned by someone who was reported missing. The case was never solved. The house had changed hands a few times after that, each owner staying only a short while. I never went back. I deleted the photos I took and tried not to think about the details. The ending of that trip was clear to me. Whatever was wrong with that place did not need my attention, and staying longer would not have brought answers, only more unease. I learned that cheap and quiet sometimes come with things you cannot see right away, and leaving when your body tells you to leave can be the smartest decision you make.